1 week season.
1 week season, fam. La Familia. Welcome back. Part 2, Day of Drafters 2024. My name is Mike Johnson, mjohnson86, running our drafters side of our Best Ball Plus 2024 product and subscription. I know we get a lot of people tuning in specifically to see, not myself. I'm just along for the ride for this first part here. Our fearless leader, the man, the myth, the legend, JMtoWin. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. How am I? Am I on air? Am I on the screen?
Yeah, you are. You are. I saw before it said your device wasn't, your mic wasn't.
My device wasn't connected, and then I had this. My background wasn't in frame, so yeah, I had to actually get literal dust off my microphone this morning. So that's where we're at. But yeah, I'm ready to get in the swing of it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, welcome. It's obviously we've been connecting throughout the off season here and there, but first time we've chatted in a while. So excited to have you on. I know a lot of our people in Discord, our OWS fam, excited to hear from you a little bit, especially first week of August. This is breaking new ground a little bit for you, isn't it?
Yeah, well, since we brought, back in the day, it was just me, right? And since we brought you and Xandamere and Hilow on board, Sonic, Larejo, like all the people who pitch in, this time is still kind of my hibernation / business mode time. I was thinking earlier today that it was probably around like mid to late August last year where I started tweeting about Tank Dell, Puka Nakua, which I think that's interesting, right? Because there's always this conversation, which I know this is something that you and Hilow are deep in the weeds on with Best Ball Plus, is like, when is the best time to draft? Which is why it's so great for anybody who's been a Best Ball Plus subscriber, for you and Hilow, hitting drafts all throughout the summer, because there are those years where if you're not drafting early, some players are so mispriced and that you're drafting them, 6-7 rounds lower, worse position for you deeper into the summer. But then there's also, like last year, if you're getting Puka Nakua, Tank Dell in the second to last round in mid to late August, you're getting, especially Puka, you're getting second round wide receiver value there at the end of the draft that 1% of rosters have and nobody from the early drafts has. So we're kind of in this cool zone of best ball drafts where some of the stuff's getting outdated, but some new stuff is coming in that's going to really help people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of hit the nail on the head there with, and it's one of the things in my drafters topics, I call it inflection points. Like there are, and specifically like I have on drafters, I went through, so I took top 10 in their contest last year. So I went deep dive. I took 7th for 30K. And I did like kind of a deep dive on the top 10 rosters from last year and the year before, because this is the third year of the contest. Then I also I got a CSV of, contacted them, reached out, and they were really cool about it. They're awesome, the guys at Drafters. And they sent me basically the CSV of the top 100 teams from the last 2 years. So I was able to break down what all these rosters looked like. And it's not just necessarily specific players, but inflection points is what I'm calling them. There's these 4 or 5 different things, commonalities that every top 100 roster, they hit on 2 or 3 of these things. So that's one of the things in our trainings with our subs that I've been able to share is understanding what those things were, what was unique about those situations, and then kind of big picture being able to shape at different parts of our draft, what types of players should we be targeting and what teams specifically maybe could fit that same criteria for this year. So like you said, the different points in the draft cycle is such such a critical element to it. And it's really cool that I could go on and on about the drafters format, and I will as we go. But I'm super excited about it. I'm 300 drafts in on drafters. So
well, I think one of the things that's cool here, and I know I'm sure you've already mentioned earlier today, we've got more people watching these than we have subscribers to Best Ball Plus. We've had like 1,000 people watching earlier. So I'm sure you mentioned the price drop, right? That we dropped it to 129 on August 1st. But it's one of the cool things about, so A, having a product like Best Ball Plus, but B, this dynamic of you and me hopping on here together. Because for those of you watching, maybe most of you know, maybe most of you don't, I don't know. But last year I didn't do Best Ball drafts. This year I'm not doing Best Ball drafts. There's just other ways to use my time in July and August for OWS that's like kind of outweighed the ability to do these Best Ball drafts. And so my mindset when I enter a conversation like this, and the same thing when I did a draft with Pete last summer, my mindset is like, okay, what players are mispriced in the ADP, and who might be going overlooked that could be drafted way higher, right? But that's kind of that basic mindset that most of the people we're drafting against are drafting with, where it's like players based. And we know from DFS, we know from the years of research and understanding of best ball that we're building up, from the deep dives that you and Hilow do in Best Ball Plus, that like the edge isn't in players. So it's kind of funny for me to come on here having preached that for a decade in DFS. And then I come in here and truly my mindset was like, I was looking at drafters ADP this morning and I was kind of thinking about who I think is being misdrafted and thinking about how interesting it is that so many of these wide receivers who are really like in a different type of year, they're all kind of second round type wide receivers are all being drafted in the first round, but it's like, well, who would you put above them? There's a lot of fragility, I think, in the top 3 or 4 rounds this year compared to a typical year. But then on, a lot of young quarterbacks or players changing teams and it just creates a lot of fragility compared to what we typically see. And yet it's not like you're going to draft somebody from the 5th round in round 1. You're still going to draft, these top round guys. So what it's about is not really how you're assessing the players so much as it is how you're handling the strategy. And I think that that's one of the, you talk about you finishing top 10 in drafters last year. And I know you had a bunch of other live teams, Hilow had a bunch of other live teams. I know a lot of our subs had a bunch of live teams. And then just the guests that you guys have had on over the years, a lot of best ball champions with Herzig and Chess Liam and whoever else. But it's not about the players. It's about these conversations around the strategy and how we handle that side of things. And so, man, I'm excited to kind of dive into some of these. I know I'm on for the next, I don't know how many drafts we're doing, right? Because we're overlapping with Hilow and Xandamere. I know I'm hanging for like an hour and a half. So some drafts and kind of see that
Hilow had to push back. He's going to be on the back end of this. I actually did. I started a draft. I forgot I had entered it, but we're rolling along already. Actually, I had the 7th pick, so I ended up with AJ Brown there. But yeah, to your point, like it's funny to me because so OWS, I was a subscriber first and had a lot of success with DFS, and then things just kind of worked out where you guys were looking to expand. You wanted to take some off your plate right when I was kind of opening myself up into doing the content stuff. And so for me, like DFS is where it started, right? And like we talk at OWS so much about like roster construction and how you like fit the pieces together and all of that sort of thing. So to your point, like with best ball, it's such a similar thing where the ADPs you're talking about, I love having you on as this like unbiased, like clean slate coming in to look at these ADPs and be like, well, wait, this looks out of whack. This looks out of whack.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for us. Like I'm 300 drafts in just to like autopilot, be like, yep, this is this guy's value roughly. Like, so to, have that clean slate is such like a valuable thing. We talk about like building in a bubble with our DFS product, like, not letting all the noise like double and triple count itself, like instead just like making your own assumptions and assertions or, seeing things that break out. Like with our talking about our draft, one of our Discord, our Best Ball Plus subscribers asked a question to me a couple weeks ago that I talked about in my training session. And it was basically like, how do you handle like all like the risers, like guys who their ADP is going to go up now as we get more news and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I hear a lot across the industry about like, well, you missed on that guy at this price, like don't pay this price for him. But my 7th place roster, for example, I got Alvin Kamara at 85th overall. He went like 110 overall for a lot of the draft cycle. I got Sam Laporta at pick 132 and Raheem Mostert at 133. They were going like at 150 and 170.
They were going in like the 200s at the beginning, weren't they?
Yeah.
I remember originally looking at Laporta, telling my brother-in-law about him in the like maybe mid-July, and then looking at ADP and he was like 215 or something. And I was like, well, maybe I'm wrong on this guy, or maybe people are just mispricing him. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Like those guys move up, yet they're still good values.
Yes.
And other times guys drop, and that doesn't mean that they are good values. Some guys are not. Every year there's going to be guys who don't have roles, but you bring up a good point of like, if you're in deep, like I look at this and I see, okay, I don't know if this is updated drafters ADP, but top 10, I see CD Lamb. Tell me if this is about right. CD Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, Puka, all like top 10 wide receivers. Yeah. And yeah, I just think that like in past years, there would, you have a healthy Cooper Kupp, you have Devontae Adams with a good quarterback, you have Justin Jefferson with Kirk Cousins, right? You like these guys, this wouldn't be these wouldn't be top 10 receivers. Like none of these guys are going to be putting up, none of these guys are super likely, except for possibly Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill. We can throw CeeDee Lamb in there because who knows what that run game is going to look like with Ezekiel Elliott as the lead back. But you're less likely, I should say, to have these like true separator type scores from this top group. Looking at Drake London being one of these top 15 wide receivers, who's really like kind of a possession type receiver. Obviously, he can go vertical more than a Keenan Allen because he's a younger guy, but that's not typically how he's used. It's not typically his strength or his skill set. Marvin Harrison Jr. being a top 15, who might end up proving worth one of those picks, but also might end up kind of being like a number 40, number 50 type guy. And so, yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of fragility at the top of the draft because, again, Amon-Ra St. Brown, extremely consistent, but not typically this like spiked week type of guy on the like old Antonio Brown or Devontae Adams with Aaron Rodgers type of spectrum. So, yeah, I think that it's an interesting sort of outside, I guess, like the top 5. And then you've got suppositions on Bijan Robinson. You've got suppositions on Saquon Barkley, who could be being drafted way too low or too high because he's on a new team. You've got Derrick Henry, who could be being drafted way too low in this Baltimore offense where they love to use the running backs close to the goal line, where he fits into that offense so well, but also he's on that age cliff where who knows what he's going to look like. And so, yeah, I just think that there are a lot of question marks, and the skill of the top of the draft isn't going to be better predicting what's going to happen. I think the skill at the top of the draft is going to be how you're setting up the team that you're building for deeper into the draft.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and there's such like an element of when you're putting together this roster, like how do those pieces fit? But then also like on drafters specifically, it's different than the playoff style formats because it's cumulative scoring. So all your drafts are competing with each other, and they're all like they're all fighting the same battle to finish first out of if this fills it's 186,000 entries. It probably is going to have overlay, but still like it's different than the other contests because in those you're in a pod with 12 people for 14 weeks. Then you go to another pod against 10 or 12 people that you got to beat for 1 week. And then same thing in week 16. And then you have the final. Whereas, so like you could have, and this was the example I used with Dr. Roto earlier. You could have you could draft the exact same team 4 times and have 4 different outcomes.
Right.
Like one of the teams could get eliminated, could not even get out of their pod if there were like 2 super teams in it. One of them could advance and lose week 15 and so on. Whereas like in this, like once you have built a roster a certain way, like there's not a ton of value in building that like exact same roster, extremely similar roster. Like if you go too deep into it. So from like a diversification and a portfolio standpoint, like the roster construction piece of that is so huge for it in this format, I find.
Yeah, that gives you a lot more creative flexibility, I think, in terms of how you think about your roster approaches. It also kind of it brings up a question I wanted to ask you. One of the issues, and I feel like this is less of an issue on drafters, or would be, one of the issues I had with best ball drafts, and one of the reasons why I realized, like, oh, I can, because I was not. Again, you're taking small sample sizes in a single year. I treat it like a DFS week, right? You can play well and have a bad week, but I didn't ever have like huge successful results in best ball, and never. I always felt like I was on the front edge of the strategy, but like I had a harder time actually implementing the strategy on my rosters than I had talking about the strategy.
Mhm.
And the reason for me was, and what I wanted to ask you about was, like, if I throw 5K in on a DFS weekend, then it's like, oh, well, whatever. If I lose this 5K, I know that I'm making plus EV decisions, whatever. But the time sunk into a draft on top of the money, where it's like I'm spending an hour on this draft or 45 minutes on this draft, and therefore I don't want to screw it up, and therefore I end up like playing it a little bit safer than I should. Do you ever see yourself running into that where, or how do you combat that, where it's like it's sometimes harder for me to pull the trigger on that play where I'm like, it's this backup running back who might never play, and then I'm like, now this roster sunk, and that's an hour spent on this roster. You know what I mean? Whereas realistically, the flip side of that, like Devon Achane last year, what if he ends up being a massive difference maker? But I always kind of end up leaning toward in my drafts that side of like, let me take something I can predict a little bit more, so that this isn't a wasted hour. Whereas obviously that's not the sharpest way to approach these drafts.
Yeah. And that's the two, I would say the two biggest struggles or biggest obstacles for best ball, like as a game and like for its growth and stuff, are the time suck, right? Like how much time it takes to put into it. And then two, like your money's tied up for 5 months, whatever. So those are two things I talk a lot about, like bankroll management and like how to approach, like, what are you going to play, having a plan. Like I put together a whole drafting plan, how I was approaching it. And my whole thing for our subscribers is like, know what you want to play. Don't just like randomly like fire shots. I guess you can, but like if you're trying to be optimal with it, like having a plan is always better. So like for me, drafters that format, that cumulative scoring format, has helped me get away from what you're talking about, because I know I can take some shots, the shots I need to take. I can be appropriately aggressive. And there's so much more in my control, right? As opposed to it, like clockwork, every week 15 and 16, you see the people on Twitter, complaining about, oh, like terrible pod luck. I had this great team for 14 weeks and then they put up 190 points, but like somebody put up 200 and I lost.
Yeah.
Like that's like, you have zero control over what your pod is. And like, we don't even have any, and I'm not saying there's anything like nefarious going on or anything, but like, there's no sort of like, we don't have any transparency on how those pods are made. And like I said, I don't think there's anything, but like you have zero control over it. You have zero control over how those pods play out, how I mean, even just like we can try to plan for the week 17 correlation stuff, but like having those weeks were so much more just very different. So for me, like the drafters format has made it much easier for me to avoid those like pitfalls of like, oh shoot, I don't want to like bust, like this roster goes busto because I took a chance, because I know like I can take shots here and be more conservative, maybe with a similar roster in a different spot. And knowing like I'm not going to get screwed over because the one that I didn't take the chance on, like had the good pod in week 15 or, that sort of.
The element of randomness is obviously high in best ball and DFS no matter what, but it's much lower in this type of format, and also that war of attrition that you deal with injuries, and like who's the random, not because he's a super skilled player, but the random third string running back who now has a lead role on a good team. It might have been the fourth or fifth string running back at this point in training camp, and then he moved up to number 3, and then there's injuries ahead of him, and all of a sudden, 0.1% or 0.5% of the rosters that are there in week 16, week 17 even have that guy rostered, and then he ends up ripping off like a 30-point game. That you don't run into that in this type of format, which I think is really cool. And I think it's also, it's something we talk about a lot on OWS, which is, like I always say, my biggest edge is on the main slate, because that's where I spend so much. The DraftKings main slate, which, it might be the hardest one to beat, but it's the easiest one for me to beat because that's where I spend so much time. And so when I try to throw in on a Showdown or on an afternoon only or something else that technically has a greater edge, I do less well on those. Whereas you found so much edge on FanDuel and so much edge on Drafters, where you're like looking for these angles where you can put in more time and have like a sharper edge than most of the other people, because they're putting their focus on places where there's less edge. I think that's an interesting angle, and something that, obviously we push Drafters at OWS, not because we don't like other sites, right? Like we love DraftKings, we love Underdog, we love Drafters, but it's like there are angles to play that are different here than in other spots, and I think that provides pretty tangible edge. So I love that that's something that you're able to tap into and kind of being so involved in the community, feed that into the community, because I think that the more people pick that up, the more they're, even having 3 OWS pennants in this draft, right? It's like you see stuff like that, you realize that OWS is hammering these edges that are available to them. And that's obviously a testament to you and the work that you do, and all the stuff you do with Drafters in terms of with the Best Ball Plus product. But really cool to see that, because I think that's a great way to maximize our ROI, is finding those edges for us.
Oh yeah, and it's a cumulative thing of understanding, like to your point, like you have recognized where your edge is at, and you kind of hammer that down. Like for me, excuse me, FanDuel for DFS, I've had a lot of success with. I've had some at DraftKings too, and Fantasy Draft RIP. But those were spots. And Drafters is from a best ball perspective, to me, it's like the best bang for your buck, just because your expected value, how you can expect your money to play out. And yeah, I love that we've been able to kind of get ahead of it. And like, for me, the value, one of the biggest values in it has been, I see so many people where you can tell like they're drafting this team, and they're not a poor best ball player, but they're drafting this team the same as they would draft it on Underdog or
Yeah.
Like, there's such an edge to understanding the format, where there are like even the ADPs, like there's several players who are way mispriced on Drafters, because it's basically just like kind of a copy paste rankings or ADP type thing from these other sites, where their profile and their correlations might make sense. Like one of them, like Jalen Waddle, like he's a guy that's going at like he goes in the 2-3 turn. Devon Achane goes at the 2-3 turn. Devontae Smith, he was like a late 3rd rounder early in the draft cycle. Then when the NFL schedule came out, well, the Eagles play the Cowboys week 17. And I said it right away. I'm like, Devontae Smith's going to be a guy who's at the 2-3 turn, because everybody on Underdog and DraftKings is going to want to take Devontae Smith with CeeDee Lamb. And that's like exactly what has happened. So like there's such an edge to to that, because people are coming in because it's a big contest. It's got a lot of money in it. But and I see it more and more even now as we get into August and you get more casual drafters or people like, overlay hunters that are just going to come in and fire their money in.
Yeah, it's like third tier in their strategy thinking. So they're, and we saw that for a long time. I don't think people do it as much anymore, but for a long time we would see people kind of take their DraftKings player rankings on a Sunday and just kind of move them over to FanDuel where the pricing's different, the scoring structure is different. And it's like, well, you can't just build your DraftKings team on FanDuel because it's totally different. And it's those who are applying that extra. I mean, same thing with like the edge that you found on afternoon only stuff or short slate stuff is developing unique independent thoughts for those types of slates. Makes a big difference compared to just copy pasting your thoughts, and that little bit of extra time and energy and effort makes a big difference in ROI. I'm curious about this. I don't think either of, or I guess you're paying attention because you're drafting it. I haven't paid much attention to this team. I'm curious some thoughts on what we've done and why we've done it the way we've done it. Because again, that roster construction stuff is I think the most interesting component. And do we get Khalil Shakir on this team, or is that a watch list over there?
We got Shakir. Yeah,
man, I felt when I was looking through these ADPs and seeing Keon Coleman above Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. I was like, man, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Khalil Shakir is like I think he's awesome. And I've been saying that since his rookie year. And I think that he'll have a big emergence this year. And obviously I'm a big Curtis Samuel fan. So yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah. And Coleman's one that I've been kind of down on. So we had Greg from Coach Speak Index on to end the earlier session. And we talked a bit about that situation. And yeah, he was just saying how much has come out of Buffalo about how raw Keon Coleman is. And we were just talking about how Buffalo is like a contender. A lot of the shortcomings of like a raw young player are probably not going to have like a ton of patience for.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And like Curtis Samuel, they're really high on. It sounds like they're using him like really creatively, moving him around. And like, Coleman's the rookie, the shiny new toy. So he gets a bunch of like, whenever he makes a catch, you see the highlight on Twitter. But like Shakir outperformed Stephon Diggs the last like 8 weeks of last season. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty high on him. And I think that Buffalo offense, that was a thing I talked about too, is getting that right. I think is going to be like one of the keys kind of for this season.
Yeah, I think I'll talk about that team for a minute. I was actually thinking about this earlier today. Obviously, they should still have a good defense, but I think that people underrate safeties and the importance of safeties in terms of being field generals and just making the whole defense work. And same thing when we talk about like having a bunch of talent on an offense doesn't make you automatically a good offense, because an NFL team is a machine. And so if you've got great pieces in the machine, but they're not all working the way they're supposed to work, the machine's not going to work. And safeties are a big part of a team working the way it's supposed to work. And the Bills moving on from Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. And if you're not doing what I do throughout the season, a lot of you guys watching this probably miss, like, those two guys would do their post-game press conferences together every week. Like, they were like a tandem. They were the leaders of that defense. So I think there's a chance that kind of that defense has some slip-ups early season, which forces the Bills to have to be in more shootouts than they would typically be in with that defense that they have. And then we also are going to see them evolve their offense based on personnel, similar to what we saw with Kansas City last year, except that, with Kansas City, that meant much lower scoring. The Bills don't really have a run game, like a running back like Pacheco, where they could just say, all right, let's just run the ball a little bit more, right? It's going to be a lot more short area stuff I would expect from the Bills this year, but it's going to still lean into their strengths, which is going to be Josh Allen. And then these guys who are really good with the ball in their hands, James Cook and Khalil Shakir and Curtis Samuel. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of creative, shorter area stuff, a lot of opportunities for Josh Allen to run. And so when we can kind of think through how an offense will function, it allows us to make sharper decisions on like where guys should be valued. Because on this roster, you've kind of said, okay, let's bet on the Bucs offense doing well this year. Let's bet on the Bucs offense doing well and staying healthy. Let's bet on the Bills offense doing well and staying healthy. And so if you're able to just grab those pieces and say, create that thesis in your head of why this offense will do well, it allows you to get that good value, and wherever the action is going on a given week, you're going to be there to scoop up the pieces of it because you've built around that team.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. So like, I'm glad that this happened while on stream here because so an interesting thing about this roster, you just talked about it, the Bucks. So I got Mike Evans at 31 overall, which his ADP is 26.9. It's actually dropped. It was around like 23, 24 for a while. And then Chris Godwin, he is, let me pull it back up. His ADP is 57.8. So like for these guys, Evans pretty much always when I get him, he'd be at like the 2-3 turn. And then if you look at like numerically, Godwin's pretty consistently been around that 5-6 turn. So, and I don't like super reaching on guys. Like I like Godwin. Their OC is from the Rams and saying Godwin's going to play more in the slot, kind of the Cooper Kupp role. So I have more Godwin than Evans, but I basically haven't really drafted them together. But like having the opportunity to on this roster, I'm going to where Evans fell far enough where it like made sense. So to what we were talking about before with like the cumulative scoring and all the rosters, like how it shapes all together. I don't need like this roster to be like the Bucks score 50 points in week 17 or something.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and we talked about it. The Bucks were a team we talked about last year when we do our NFL Edge, our DFS interpretations. You and I do our player grids where like those two and Rashad White were like 75% of their off or 80% of their offense. And like they're not just that, but I think in your inner circle, you would talk about like how concentrated the fantasy was that you basically could bet on one of them having like a 20-point week basically every week once we got like deep into the season.
Yeah, any of these teams, especially in a format like this, any of these teams with a narrow distribution of touches, if they're like the median producer in the NFL, right? If this offense is the 16th best offense, 17th best offense in the NFL, you're still guaranteeing yourself a huge block of points if these guys stay healthy just by locking them up. That actually makes me curious about. So I'm a big fan of Dave Canales. Obviously, he was quarterbacks coach for the Seahawks 2 years ago, offensive coordinator for the Bucks last year, now head coach of the Panthers, and kind of oversaw that Geno Smith resurgence, the Baker Mayfield resurgence, just on a human level and the energy he presents. I'm a fan of him in the way that like I'm a fan of Sean McVay, right? Like he's the kind of guy who he's positive, but he's strong. Like players are going to gravitate toward him. He understands the game well. He presents his message to his players well. And I feel like because of how few weapons the Panthers have, that's another team that's sort of guaranteed a narrow distribution of touches. Curious any thoughts that you've had on that offense, or if you've pulled together any rosters that have bet around that offense this year.
Around the Panthers?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he is for sure like 2 years ago, I made a decent amount of money by being in on the Seahawks, right? He was with the Seahawks. Yeah. And then last year, same thing with the Bucks. He kind of resuscitated what they were doing, and like Bryce Young is like, especially in this cumulative scoring format, like he's not going to lose his job this year. Last year's number 1 overall pick, and it's almost like Trevor Lawrence's freshman rookie season where Urban Meyer was just like the train wreck of all train wrecks. And then you look at like Frank Reich, who on paper seemed like a good hire at the time, but like in retrospect, like clearly he was just like, very stuck in mud in how he approached things last year. And then the supporting cast around Young was also not great. So like you bring in Deontay Johnson, who's like a great separator. I drafted Xavier Legette, the first round pick out of South Carolina. Physical, like a big bodied receiver who can make some plays after the catch. They drafted Jonathan Brooks. like, yeah, I'm pretty excited about this Panthers offense. And, to the team-wide bets that you alluded to on this sort of format, those teams, like last year, it was the Texans, that everybody's kind of like really down on.
Yeah.
Last year, also the Packers, like teams that like everyone's really down on them, but when it results in like all of their guys being like depressed, cheap prices, like if they're if the Panthers are the 15th best offense in the league this year, like you're smashing if you have a roster with 4 Panthers, So and especially like you said with that condensed approach that he's had in the past.
Yeah, like Canales has and it's one of the cool things about because that's why I started down that thought trail, was because I was thinking about, will the Bucks stay as condensed, right? And then you realize that they were condensed with Byron Leftwich there, they were condensed with Canales there. They'll probably stay condensed this year, but also Canales was condensed with the Seahawks, condensed with the Bucks, and just like a lack of weapons on the Panthers, it kind of forces your hand to have a condensed distribution of touches in that situation as well. Obviously, a more murky backfield with Brooks, potentially starting the year on injured reserve, or however that ends up playing out, and less value in a drafters format, and saying, well, this guy is going to be the main guy by week 16, 17, or could be, because we need the full season worth of points. But yeah, I think that's a good way to look at things too, is like when people are down on they were down on the Bucks last year, down on the Packers last year, down on the Texans. And it's like, well, what's the downside? The downside is about what people are drafting to, but the upside is dramatically higher than that, as opposed to like a Raiders, right? Because it's like, how high is the ceiling on Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, right? Is one of them going to suddenly surprise us and prove to be like a really good NFL quarterback? And I guess we could have said the same thing about Geno Smith a couple of years ago, although no, I guess there were no signs. Like we could have said the same thing about Geno Smith a couple of years ago, but realistically, kind of thinking about that, of like, we don't know, right? And if we move out of the game of trying to predict and instead look at the range of possibilities, there are these teams where that range of possibilities, the ceiling is way higher than people give it credit for. What do you think about Kirk Cousins like being drafted so low when he's got this good group of weapons? Drake London's being drafted in the second round. Obviously, Kirk Cousins doesn't run, but you look back the last couple of years, like his number of high-end quarterback games, like top 5, top 7 weekly scoring quarterback games, is right up there with kind of the top guys. Matthew Stafford, another one I'm surprised to see getting drafted so low. Thoughts on either of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cousins is like Cousins, like the Falcons are just, they're so intriguing to me, because I mean, we've been on the anti-Arthur Smith, what's he doing sort of thing for the last couple of years. We've watched the Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota. They're not utilizing their weapons so much, and now we have Cousins, who is like the epitome of like a quarterback who, like, if you put talent around him, like he's going to make the most of it. Like he makes Justin Jefferson an elite guy. He made TJ Hawkinson before he was like the tight end 1 when Cousins was healthy last year. That's what we're looking for. That's what, and then Bijan Robinson, even, I know Cousins had Dalvin Cook, but Bijan is like, from a pass catching standpoint, is like on another level from Dalvin. So like, you look at Cousins and what he has around him, and then that division kind of not really being like, you got the Panthers, Saints, and Bucks. None of them are really like, it's not like a scary division by any means.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the Falcons could be a top 10 offense for sure.
I agree, man. I think that they could be. I mean, and I guess I can't say a surprise, because Bijan Robinson and Drake London are being taken at the top of these drafts. People are taking the
Kyle Pitts.
What's up?
Kyle Pitts.
There we go. Large, athletic, wide receiver type tight end. People are taking the Kyle Pitts plunge again, but then Cousins is kind of being devalued. And that's another team with like should be a relatively narrow distribution of touches as well, to where you get those points all piling up together. Yeah, I think that's one of those teams that has a lot of potential to really like outperform a lot of other teams in terms of the fantasy production that they provide, just based on the talent that they have, and how narrow that distribution of touches is. So you get a lot of those points isolated on individual players. And it's not that players who, for anybody wondering, right? It's not that players who are on a team with a broad distribution of touches can't hit. It's just that you're layering in that much more guesswork on a roster. So like the more you can guarantee points in certain areas, then the higher your floor is, and then those ceiling plays can kind of bounce off that higher floor. And so that's kind of how I approach DFS, right? Or a set of DFS rosters is, what are the offenses with those narrow distributions of touches in potentially high scoring game environments? And let me mix and match those players in. And then those, when you're picking amongst 5 Packers wide receivers, like then you can mix and match those guys in on those rosters, but they're building off of the floor of like, I know I'm getting points somewhere from the Rams, somewhere from the Bucks, somewhere from one of these teams where where the touches are going. And then you layer in that Packers dart and say, maybe it's this guy this week, maybe it's this guy this week. Oops, sorry. And that's kind of the same way I would approach best ball rosters, is kind of thinking through things in that like bigger picture of where you're layering in your certainty and where you're layering in your risk.
Yeah, exactly. And understanding again that like those elements of roster construction beyond just like, oh, these are my starting receivers, this is my starting running backs. Like you said, layering those things in across your roster and then across a large sample of rosters, for sure. So my last pick, I took Will Levis as my second quarterback. I took Tyjae Spears earlier on as my third running back. Took him in the end of the ninth round. So the Titans are a team that Hilow and I have been pretty high on and kind of pounding the drum about since like May. I'm excited about them. I'm curious your thoughts and just your overall how you see them.
That's a great question. Levis is an interesting one because, there were rumors about him being like a high first round pick. And then throughout the draft process, maybe it was throughout his like last year in college, whatever it was, like he dropped, but he still has that kind of like a Ryan Mallett type, where Ryan Mallett was supposed to be going back in the day, he was supposed to be like potentially the number 1 overall pick. And then, by the time he's coming out, he's a 3rd round pick, but like that ceiling is still there. A lot of the people it's like so much of quarterback is processing, right? Nobody would ever look at Brady's arm or his mobility and be like, oh, this guy's probably the best quarterback in the league. So much of quarterback comes down to the offense you're in and your ability to process and run that offense and understand how to win games and all that. And that's the big question mark on a guy like Will Levis, right? But so many people who I respect, their opinion is that Will Levis is the Titans quarterback of the future. To be fair, a lot of people I respect, their opinion last year for the first half of the season was that Sam Howell was the Commanders quarterback of the future, right? So like these guys who have all the tools, who have the talent, they can fail to ever pull it all together. But I do think he's in a good situation with Callahan as the offensive core, the head coach, the offensive kind of guru there, and with Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. And I think it's interesting, and especially how deep into the draft you're able to get him. It's an interesting swing because we saw that 1 week with DeAndre Hopkins where, what was it? Hopkins had like 3 touchdowns and Levis had 4, if memory serves. Yeah. But it's like he has that ability to throw the ball to all corners of the field. He has that ability to hit the big plays. And so then the question just comes down to consistency. I sometimes think about athletes in terms of, I was a Red Sox. I am a Red Sox fan. I haven't watched baseball in 5 years, but I was a Red Sox fan for a long time, right? Clay Buchholz threw a no-hitter, like his 5th career start. And every once in a while, he would just throw these gems of a game, but really he was like a number 3, number 4 pitcher. And the difference between, for the most part, the difference between a number 1 pitcher and a number 3 or 4 pitcher isn't how good they are. It's just how consistent they are. Like the number 1 pitcher might have 28 great starts out of 30 starts. And that number 3 or 4 guy might have 6 or 7 great starts out of 30 starts. And so similar with somebody like Levis, like he's going to come out and probably have some number 1 pitcher type games, some top quarterback type games. And then the question is just, can he become that consistent guy? And we have no idea. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting angle to play because the ceiling is definitely there on him. And yeah, one of the ways that I always looked at quarterback was, what's my fallback option? Is my fallback option super consistent? And having Kirk Cousins on a roster like this, where like that was one of my favorite guys to take, was Kirk Cousins always. Cause like, okay, if my home run swing fails, I know Kirk Cousins is getting me points. And so this type of setup is perfect in my opinion, because you can take that swing on Levis. Maybe you're getting some asymmetric upside on him, but if you're not, you still get a couple spiked weeks and you get Kirk Cousins as that fallback option.
Right. And there's certainly an aspect of that. And I was actually going to bring that up. That was like my thought on the next thing I would say about it was like, because Cousins, when we talked about the Falcons, he doesn't have that huge rushing upside necessarily. He's probably not going to have like the 38-point game Lamar Jackson had at the end of last season against the Dolphins. But he's going to, because of how that offense is built, he's unlike, his floor is going to be probably like 15 points most weeks. He might have a couple duds, but most weeks he's going to be pretty solid. So like for a guy like Levis, whereas like if you put him with I don't know, Jaden Daniels, the rookie,
or Caleb Williams or something like that.
Yeah, like where like there might be some bumps in the road. There might be some feeling out. There just the way things play out. We don't know how the offense will come together. There's a lot more to figure out where like Levis might not be as good of a fit there. And one of the things I talk about on drafters, and I don't want to give too much of like the strategy stuff that our subs are paying away on the free stream here, but one of the things I talk about is like the quarterback position. It's like in golf, like I'm big into golf. So like a 4-round PGA tournament, like you can't win it on day one, but you can lose it. And that's kind of how I view the quarterback position on drafters, is like the quarterback position is not going to win the contest for you. And I dive in my training sessions and like the concepts that I share with our subscribers on why and how to exploit those things. And kind of what those top 10, top 100 rosters, how they built out the quarterback position for the most part. It's not going to win it for you because you're just not going to separate really without overextending yourself on draft capital, but it could lose it for you. It could lose it for you if you put too many of those like big swing players all on that one roster, where now you have 3 or 4 weeks throughout the season where you're taking 7 points at your quarterback position. That could be a big deal. Like my 7th place roster last year, it was 4 points out of 6, which was a $10,000 swing. I had Mike Williams was my pick at the 3-4 turn. And I basically was like taking him on some rosters and Amari Cooper on others last year. And if on that roster, if I had taken Amari, I win the whole thing. But Mike, I mean, it's an injury. It is what it is. So that's a bigger swing. But like, I mean, I was like 25 points out of like 11th place, which was like $1,000 or $1,500 or something. And I was 25 points out of 3rd place, which was like $100,000. So like those swings those swings are huge, where putting those two quarterbacks together, where Cousins gives you that steady presence, and you can ride the waves with Levis, is kind of nice.
Yeah, that speaks to a number of things too, because the swing from an Amari to a Mike Williams like is greater than the swing of like locking up a quarterback at that spot, and then somebody else deeper in the draft is getting Kirk Cousins and a home run swing behind him, right? And it's like, as long as Cousins stays healthy, like they're not going to be that far behind you in points. Whereas by taking a quarterback up at that spot, you're missing out on the opportunity to take that Amari Cooper, who ends up producing at such a high level and really being a difference maker on your roster. And then, you said that thing about like 7 points, and that was exactly what I was thinking when you said, when we were talking about Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams combined with somebody like Will Levis, is that it's like you got this floor of points with Kirk Cousins, and then like hopefully Will Levis can have these spikes up from there. Whereas if you're Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, you might have spikes, but like you're also going to have these waves, right? You're going to have these dips. And if those dips are coinciding, then all of a sudden you have like a 6-point week at quarterback. Whereas the people who are just taking consistent points are getting 16, 18 points, whatever it ends up being. And the thing with Cousins is, and this is always, I look at these things throughout the season of like who produces spiked weeks in season. And somebody like Cousins produces those types of weeks a lot more often than people necessarily realize, where he's throwing for 325 yards and 3 touchdowns, and all of a sudden that's 25 points right there, And so it's like you still get those high end scores from a guy like Cousins, even though he's never going to put up the 30 burger with the rushing. He can still have those big games that sort of give you those spikes, and you can ride everything else from there.
Yeah, for sure. Want to ask you about, so I just drafted Malik Washington for the Dolphins. Mike McDaniel obviously has been a wizard with the Dolphins. It's been great. What are your expectations? There's a lot around them, right? They added Jonnu Smith. McDaniel's saying going to use the tight end position. Greg from Coach Speak Index was talking a little bit about that on our last segment. How, first of all, do you have any thoughts on Malik Washington or that wide receiver 3? I know they got Beckham there too. But just like, are you optimistic about the Dolphins this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like Achane last year, right? Like if we get logical, then it's like, oh, here's the pros and cons, and maybe the cons outweigh the pros. But if we look macro and we just say, what offenses do you want a piece of? Like, I want a piece of the Dolphins, right? Yeah. And so to me, I think any pick like that deep in the draft has value. I was actually, speaking of the Dolphins, I was looking at that Mike Gesicki pick, which is one I really like because he is basically a giant slot wide receiver. And I was really high on him with the Patriots last year. And obviously that entire offense was just a complete crater of production. But I think Gesicki has a good shot this year with the Bengals of significantly outperforming his ADP, kind of playing that big slot role in that really good offense. And people forget it was, I guess, 3 years ago. It was before Mike McDaniel came to the Dolphins. They forget how good of a producer Mike Gesicki was as a guy who was a quote tight end, couldn't really block, but just functioned as a big wide receiver in the slot. So yeah, I like that pick as well. And then any piece of that Dolphins offense in my mind is any speed piece. McDaniel's going to find a way to use them, right? And if you're wrong on Malik Washington, the downside is your number 19 pick was a swing and miss. But if you're right, especially if there's an injury and you're right on him, then you end up getting a guy, with maybe 5th round value down in the 19th round.
Yeah. And to your Gesicki point, like he is, well, I mean, basically McDaniel came in and Gesicki, it was just that he couldn't block, and you have to be able to block in the McDaniel Shanahan scheme, right? So like that was kind of what played him out of there, I think, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And because they were using, was it Durham Smythe? They were using somebody who was like, oh, he can't catch, he can't catch, he can block,
They had another really big guy. I can't think of his name. It was like 6'6".
But yeah, and Jonnu Smith, obviously known as one of the best blocking tight ends and also athletic, so it makes a lot more sense in that offense. And then with the Patriots, obviously just a total dumpster fire of an offense last year, and they weren't able to pull things together. But I think he still has some legs, to his career, and you've already got Trey McBride there, who, should be expected to perform at or above that ADP level. So you've got that locked in, and then Gesicki has that chance to provide some spiked weeks above that or even into that flex spot. I also really like the Jacoby Myers pick. This is just an interesting note that really doesn't correlate directly to best ball or DFS, because You still have to deal with their quarterback. You still have to deal with how that team's going to try to win games based on their personnel. But Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams talked about two different interviews. I heard Devontae Adams talk about Jacoby Myers as the most underrated player in the NFL, and basically saying that he's the hardest working guy on the team and understands the game so well. And then recently, Julian Edelman was asked, like, what rookies, when they first came to training camp, did he realize they were going to be a lot better than people realized? And he mentioned Devin McCourty and Jacoby Myers as the two guys who had stood out to him in that way. Just a guy who's like, I think because of his draft capital, people overlook him in fantasy and DFS and best ball, but just a much better player than people tend to realize that he is. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, again, dealing with the quarterback situation there and the way that offense is going to try to win games, but when you're looking for opportunities for spiked weeks, taking good players is never a bad way to go.
Yeah, and like to the Myers, to your point on him, like he had, remember when Jacoby Myers can't score a touchdown?
Yeah, for like it was like 2 years, 3 years, something like that.
His first 3 years in the league, he had 2 touchdowns. Then the last 2 on a bad Patriots offense and the Raiders last year, he has 14, 8 last year. He had 8 in his first 4 years and then 8 last year. So certainly agree with that. And then like from a strategy perspective, talking about Malik Washington and the Dolphins situation, I like him, especially on this roster. And some rosters, I won't necessarily pull the trigger on him because I think he's quite an X factor type guy. And like, I don't know how involved he'll be specifically. But if you look at this roster, how it's built, he's my 8th receiver. Wide receivers 2 through 7, they all have double-digit buys. So that buys me a lot of time for him to get involved in the offense, for potentially, maybe Waddle or Hill misses some time, has like those ailments in the middle of the season that can reduce their workload or take them off the field. So like Washington fits well in that I kind of see his area of highest likelihood of productivity as that 19th round pick, being right when this roster is going to need it. So
that makes a lot of sense. And you also have with those first 6 guys, you have all of them are top 2 receivers on their offense, which I think is, I mean, I guess Nico Collins is obviously the number 1, but he's also Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell are excellent receivers. But you're taking this guy in the 2nd round, you're basically calling him a number 1 or number 2 receiver on his team.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Evans, number 1, Godwin, number 2. Khalil Shakir is going to be a top 2 wide receiver on his team. Jacoby Myers, top 2 wide receiver on his team. And so even though some of these aren't, Khalil Shakir, more question marks because people are like, we don't know Shakir all that well. How are the Bills going to run this offense? Or Jacoby Myers being on this team that's probably going to run the ball a lot and doesn't have a great quarterback. And yet, like, you're locking in high confidence bets just in terms of available opportunities for production because these guys are going to be on the field. I see so many rosters where it's like that by that 4th guy, people are taking swings on guesses on what that guy's role is going to be. And you have a ton of upside with guys who can hit. Nico Collins, we saw so many, 30-point games last year. We know AJ Brown can put up those types of games. Mike Evans can put up those types of games. So you got so many opportunities for spiked production, but you also just have guys who are consistently going to be involved. Same thing with Trey McBride on this offense. I'm curious your thoughts on the running backs on this roster and why you, obviously, to have a wide receiver core that looks like this, you had to sacrifice somewhere. Sacrificed at quarterback, which we talked about, and running back. So curious your thoughts on either the individual players or the approach to the construction of these guys.
So Cook is a guy that I was all over last year in DFS, second half of the year, and it paid off in a big way for me. And he really kind of took over. He had some huge games. I think he had like 1,600 total yards last season. They did draft Ray Davis, but I'm just like, in general, I'm bullish on him, on Cook. He seems to be ascending as a player, and like, I'm confident in Josh Allen keeping this offense as one of the top offenses in the league. Obviously, I think Shakir, I agree with you. I think he might be their number 1. But like, they don't have like alpha, like dominant target, like have to throw this guy the ball X number of times, have to throw this guy the ball X number of times. So like from that standpoint, like he's the lead back on an offense that I expect to be top 5, top 5 to 8 in the league for sure. And there's a chance that, I mean, his main competition is this unproven rookie, and it's a contender where like how much patience are they going to have if the rookie takes a little while to
I mean, even
figure
Cook,
it out?
they pulled him in really slowly his rookie year.
So like I think Cook, this could be like the career year for him is kind of my take on it. And so when I can get him in the 6th, I basically always pull the trigger on it. I'm usually pretty wide receiver heavy on drafts. Connor, I'm really high on. I was talking with Greg from Coach Speak about the Cardinals, and I just keep getting higher on that offense, and just like under Jonathan Gannon with Drew Petzing, his offensive coordinator, I'm just very bullish about them. And he, like when he was on the field last year, he was like wildly productive. The last couple of years, really. And then Tyjae Spears, I'm really high on him. We talked about the Titans a little bit, but he's a guy that the Titans, they are like Tyjae Spears was a 3rd round pick because he has knee on knee bone on bone issue in his knee. And so like there was medical red flags at the draft. Talent wise, he's like very explosive and very good. So like 2 or 3 years from now, like I don't know if Tyjae Spears sees a second contract or a much of a second contract, but this year I'm very excited about him. And then Eckler, I mean, he was a top 6 pick last year, but he was injured. And so now, getting him there. And then I've just got 3 young guys with Vidal and Johnson and Dylan Laub to kind of fill out that room. I'm not as high on the Raiders, but with how they profile from like a game script perspective, which we talk about in DFS all the time, he's like more of the pass catching guy. And if I don't think they're going to win many games, that could play out. One, with him getting more work in like catch up mode, and 2, later in the year, like they're going to try to see what their young guys have.
Yeah. I mean, I like the. I'm curious about Spears sharing that backfield with Pollard, who obviously also explosive and similar skill set. And I could see that being a split, or I could see one of those guys emerging. The Eckler one I think is really interesting. Eckler and James Conner, both 29 years old, which I just had to look that up because I thought they were both 28, but both 29 years old. So not quite at that typical age 30 age cliff for running backs. Obviously Eckler looked washed last year, but we don't know what was going on in his body and what guys have resurgent years. And like you said, the guy drafted top 6 last year, and getting him where you're getting him 114th. That's just like a ton of positive expected value over time on picks like that. And I think James Conner is one of these guys who, because when you watch him, he's not flashy, he's slow. He's not shifty, but he's strong. He's generally durable. He's a great pass catcher. He's great on the goal line. And I hadn't even thought about that angle of the Arizona offense, but with Kyler Murray back, with Trey McBride, with Marvin Harrison, like they have weapons on that offense to be able to do well.
Dortch and Wilson are getting like glowing.
Yeah, Michael Wilson, Dortch, and who else do they have competing with Dortch in the slot? They got somebody else, but yeah, like I think that's an offense that could end up surprising people. Where you look at the record and you look at
Zay Jones.
Oh, that's right, Zay Jones. Who I think Zay Jones is just an excellent route runner, and obviously former 2nd round pick, kind of flamed out in Buffalo, but since then, like he hasn't been a sexy guy, and yet he produced really well with the Raiders. He produced really well with Jacksonville. I could see him producing really well once again. So yeah, I could see that offense significantly outperforming what people are expecting from them. Not a great division for, there's like 6 games that don't set up super well for production. I guess Seattle is okay for them for production, but yeah, I like those calls at running back. And it's just always interesting to see how, because again, when you look at this roster, the wide receivers on it, it's like, oh, you shouldn't be able to get all those wide receivers on a roster together. And then you got to realize, oh, well, you're making sacrifices somewhere else to do that. But the sacrifices at running back might not be true sacrifices if particularly James Cook and James Conner prove to be values in this draft. And then you've got these other guys, providing some spike potential from there.
Yeah. And I find myself Austin Eckler, I'm taking like a ton of right now because his ADP is in like the 120s on drafters. It's full PPR. He has that pass catching skill set. And he is older, like you talked about, but it's not to the same extreme. But you look at like Raheem Mostert for the Dolphins last year as a 31-year-old. And it's like, well, yeah, he was 31, but he doesn't have the tread on his tires of a normal 31-year-old. And for Eckler, he entered the league a little later. I think he was an undrafted running back. And so he had to like work his way up. He wasn't one of these backs coming in getting 250 touches as a rookie. And then even once he did kind of get his chance, he was kind of more spelling Melvin Gordon. He was like the 30% to Gordon's 70%. So like he's 29 and we think of him as a workhorse because the last couple of years he has been, but he doesn't have like a 29-year-old's mileage on him. Even though, you know what I mean? Like that number.
I'm excited about Eckler.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of a sliding. So both those backfields, the Titans and the Commanders, I mean, I would say, and because I'm not like low on Tony Pollard and I'm not low on Brian Robinson. I think both those offenses have a chance to be a lot better than what they're projected to be. And I think that in both situations, I think both backs in both offenses, so all four of those backs are like are good players, and good players and good offenses, and that's where the portfolio of rosters for me is like, I'm going to have some rosters with Spears and Eckler. I'm going to have some with Spears and Robinson. I'm going to have some with Pollard and Robinson, some with Pollard and Eckler. Like, I'm taking these guys. It's situations that I'm targeting and expecting over the big picture. Either they could all be solid rosters or some of them are going to be dead and some of them are going to be awesome. Like if there's one guy in each backfield that emerges, I'm going to have some rosters where I have both of those guys. And then those are all going to be on rosters like this that are just like stacked at wide receiver. And then you just need things to break right at one other position and you're in the hunt.
Yeah. One of the things I'll always remember was your checking the boxes course on OWS. And you basically talked about, like, you went through all of your big wins in your DFS career and the players who were on those rosters. And there was like Donald Parham was on one of the rosters and he's obviously like a super athletically gifted dude. And every other player on those rosters that you had big wins with were like legitimately good NFL football players. And you were basically talking about how much more rare it is to win a contest with like guys who are not good NFL players. And you went through like the draft capital on these guys or the athletic profiles on these guys. And that's like, I see that too with this roster is we can throw in questions, like guys are going to have question marks when you're drafting in the hundreds, right? So rather than question marks about like, what is this guy's role going to be, or is he good or not? Like you could take a question mark on a guy like Austin Eckler, where you're like, oh, I know that he's good. And if he's healthy, then there you go. And I really think like to that point of like guys who have less tread. I know Derrick Henry's gotten a ton of carries later in his career, but remember those first like 3 years, he was playing behind DeMarco Murray for a little while. And then he was getting like 8 carries a game. But then like he's being drafted 30th and I think he's drafted too low. But then it's like, well, why not Austin Eckler as well? And so, I think that's an important thing too, not to give too much away, but just that idea of who are good players, that instead of filling up your roster with like this guy might or might not be good. This guy like Xavier Legette, whatever, he might or might not be good. We don't know. That's like one guy on this roster, that we're saying that about. And the rest of them, it's like, oh no, like we know who these guys are. The upsides there, obviously some of the deeper running backs, but I think that's a really sharp way to think about rosters is, am I making sure I'm getting good NFL players as well? So that if things break their way, they can actually produce well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And the one last thing with this roster I want to talk to point out is so like I took Evans and Godwin early. I did not take Mayfield. I already had Kirk Cousins at 151. And so Mayfield, I would have had to take him at that next pick, 162, which I would have been reaching on him a little bit. And like it's different, the cumulative scoring from the playoff style format, where like if this was Underdog or DraftKings, I for sure take Mayfield there because it's like, okay, I got the Tampa double stack. If that hits week 17, like I want to have him, but he's like profiles so similarly to Cousins that I was like, no, I'm going to wait and I'll take a more of a swing with that next one. But then later I took Cade Otton as my second tight end. And that kind of is kind of building in like some fragility. Like, what is the scenario where Godwin and Evans like both kind of dud in a week? Well, Cade Otton's probably the next guy that's going to be on the field every snap. So it kind of fit with that there. So just wanted to point that out. And there's a lot deeper stuff than that that we get into Best Ball and Best Ball Plus that subscribers know about. Anybody who's watching would love to have you join us. I'm going to bring in for a little OWS campfire session.
Yeah.
We got Xandamere here. X, how we doing?
We're doing well. How are you? It's good to see you guys.
Terrific. Good to see you, man.
Voice is getting a little, scratchy.
You've been at this all day.
Yeah.
No, you know what?
I can do the marathon
on Fridays when I do the Angles podcast and the show with Pete, and then the Rotogrinder show with Squirrel Patrol, and that's like 2.5 hours of talking, and I'm like, well, I am not talking the rest of the day.
yeah.
So yeah, you've got a day on your hands.
But it's awesome to see you guys. We're like around the corner from football season again. It's it's time to start ramping up on that, and
heating up.
It's exciting to get to be here. What's funny is like I'm prepared for me to embarrass myself here because I don't engross myself in NFL year round, right? As Jam. I tend to prepare before the season, and you caught me sort of. Normally, it's mid-August for me is when I start kind of diving into NFL, because right now it's like I'm doing baseball. I'm doing it's an election year, so I'm doing politics.
Betting on the politics.
The political betting markets are amazing. We made a mint on Josh Shapiro.
Cubs fan is out every like 2 years. Cubs fan is like, you got to get on this political betting with Xandamere and me.
Yeah, it's great. So it's like I'm just engrossed in other things, and I start to pivot to NFL soon. But I thought it'd be interesting to come here because I think, from a subscriber perspective, most of our customers are not engrossed in NFL hours a day year round, right? That's why they come to us, right? That's why they want to see JM and Mike and Hilow and the rest of the OWS crew, because they're not, they're not spending hours a day studying football, and that's what we do for them. And so I thought maybe it'd be interesting to give, I thought about declining when Mike asked me, and just being like, no, I'm not up to speed in NFL. And I actually thought it might be more interesting to accept it and be like, my experience as a drafter right now is probably similar to at least a lot of our users. And in fact, many of them probably know more than me right now about who was drafted where, all that, like their outlooks, what the news is out of camp. And so I thought that'd make it interesting. But I am not like fully up to speed. I will, however, note I caught the end of your conversation. I just want to note about drafting good players and how big tournaments you have to have good players in your rosters to win. Sonic would like a word, because when he won the Money Maker, he had Ryan Griffin as his tight end, which will always
Ryan Griffin out of UConn. Hey, I liked Ryan Griffin for a while there, so
I'm sure
he doesn't fit the good player profile, but he's probably 2,500 on DraftKings, and make it work.
He scored like 20 points that week or something. I think it was like his career game. Sonic caught it and won $1 million.
I remember we were on the Friday night square table. Levitan came on with a UConn shirt one time, and I thought he was hinting at a Ryan Griffin week because, and he was like, "Wait, what? Ryan Griffin? No."
So
I was on the Ryan Griffin train. I'm with you there.
Sonic would tell you he was not a high confidence play on his part that week. It's just sort of a random cheap tight end that fit.
Yeah, throw him in there. That's what you got to do sometimes.
I don't think anyone ever touts Ryan Griffin, do they?
guess we can see. You know, I think it's funny though. Like even with that, in what what you referenced, I did say I think I caveated it with like you can't have more than one like dart throw, not very good. Like, but generally, like it's so easy in DFS for people uh to be like, oh, well, this guy's cheap and he's going to play a bunch and it's a good offense. But it's like, yeah, but he's not very good. And so,
Yeah.
like, this coach might have like an adjusted game plan because, like, if they usually have this stud running back that they build everything around and now he's hurt, the next guy up doesn't automatically get that same usage.
Or I think about how much fear I had week in and week out down the stretch last year, fading Quentin Johnston. Fear just because it was like, he's going to play every snap. Everybody else on the Chargers is hurt. Everybody in DFS is going to play this guy. And like, if he hits, like, there's no way I'm winning this week. And yet I'm like, he's not good. And everybody's going to play him. So I'm not going to play him. Yeah, it's like, you know, the more, I don't know, I just think about that all the time. The more good players you get on your roster, the better your chances are over time. It's not always going to work out for you, but that's definitely a sharp way to think about rosters, or a question to ask yourself as you go through them. And again, especially you're drafting 20 rounds, you're not going to get all good players, but like as much as you can maximize that, it definitely helps.
It's really easy to talk yourself into bad plays, both in DFS and in best ball, right? Like it's really easy to talk yourself into the like, but what if?
Mm-hmm.
And you even see analysts do it, people who know NFL really well, who know DFS really well, who are good DFS players, and you can tell they're doing it when they answer a question by saying, yeah, I could see him as a GPP play. That is the laziest analysis ever done. And what it means is I think that player is shit. It's a terrible play, but who knows? He could be successful, and I don't want to be the guy who like is on record saying don't play this guy, and then he falls into 3 touchdowns or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I've been there and it sucked. I remember like I was like, don't play Joe Mixon. He had the best game of his entire career.
Yeah,
and, like,
6 touchdowns
all time, I believe. It's like one of the best running back games in the history of NFL.
And you know what else? I think we made the Saturday Slate podcast free that week too, to like showcase it.
Thanks for that.
And you and Hilow both like went through all of Joe Mixon's metrics, and you were like, do not play Joe Mixon. And then he put up 6 touchdowns, and we were all over Justin Fields that week, who also had like a 40-point game, 45-point game. There are weeks like that, because you know what? Joe Mixon scored like 8 touchdowns that whole season, and 6 of them were in that one game. Like, you're right every other week, just not that week.
I don't know. But point being though, is it's really easy to talk. Because the thing is, sometimes bad plays hit, right? Mm-hmm. If they never hit, it'd be easy to avoid them. It'd be like, oh, this play goes in the bucket of, it has all the attributes of a play that has never hit in the history of DFS or the history of best ball. It's like, okay, I'll scratch that off. But bad plays hit sometimes. You know, bad rosters win tournaments, both in best ball and in DFS, probably less so in best ball, just because our sample of overall best ball tournaments is smaller. Right. But like,
bad or understanding of who a bad play is in best ball. Sometimes you're like, oh, this guy's probably a bad option, but maybe he's not, you know, because there's so much unknown.
And you find that even more so in like the underdog stuff where it's playoff, because it's like, well, what if this could be the guy you need in week 17?
Yeah.
Like,
what if Joe Mixon has this 6
I just need to be right 1 week out of 17,
Yeah.
and then I can claim I was a genius. JM, while we've got you, we got some comments, some questions. I got one up on the screen here. What were some of the undervalued running backs and wide receivers you noticed when first looking at ADP?
Yeah, I'm looking at this ADP and just trying to think through like what really stood out to me in these top 2 rounds was just how much uncertainty there is at the top of the draft, right? Obviously, CeeDee Lamb, you know, it is what it is. He's an alpha. It's a team that prefers to play a balanced style of attack. It's hard for me to see him being the number 1 overall wide receiver in the NFL, but whatever, like still a first round pick. Tyreek Hill belongs where he is. Jamar Chase, assuming, you know, that everything gets worked out with the contract, belongs where he is. But Jamar Chase even isn't, he's not your typical top 5 overall pick, in that he's not a super consistent, like elite game producer. He's just like has these spiked weeks throughout the season. And it's not like he has really big games when he's down. Justin Jefferson's got Sam Darnold. Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't really fit the profile of a top 5, top 6 pick. Breece Hall doesn't fit the profile of a top 10 pick. AJ Brown, I'm happy with him being top 10 pick. Puka Nacua doesn't really fit the profile of a top 10 pick, sharing targets with Cooper Kupp. Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison, a lot of question marks around them. Drake London doesn't really fit the profile of a 1-2 turn type pick. Nico Collins here in the second round, but then you've also got but do I want Stephon Diggs? Do I want Tank Dell? So I just think that that's the main thing I see at the top of the draft is it's not like, or Malik Neighbors, like you got Daniel Jones still at quarterback. So there's a lot more question marks at the top of the draft than I'm used to seeing. What's up?
Greg from Coach Speak thinks it'll be Drew Lock by mid to late in the season. He said he thinks that because Jones has the injury guarantee for next season, that if the Giants are struggling, they're going to shut him down and go to Lock just so they don't.
Yeah, but if they're struggling, Daboll's trying to save that job any way he can, I guess. Belichick's looming out there. But yeah, no, that top of that top 2 rounds just feels really weird to me and like a lot more fragile than a typical first 2 rounds of a draft. And then when you get down to I think that guys you get down to the places where there are question marks, but then it's like, well, this guy could actually produce as a first round type of pick, which would be like the Saquon Barkleys, the Derrick Henrys. Stephon Diggs, I don't think he'll produce like a first round pick, but he technically falls into that bucket of guys who could produce like a first round pick that are being drafted much lower. Deshaun Watson, I'll go back to that one again of it could be a Tiger Woods situation where this guy is just completely broken and he'll never be good again. But also he could go back to being Deshaun Watson this year. And all of a sudden that entire Browns offense is a lot more attractive. Deshaun Watson's a lot more attractive from a fantasy perspective. I don't know about as a human being, but Josh Jacobs has potential to outproduce his ADP. Aaron Jones has super potential to outproduce his ADP in a Kevin O'Connell offense. So I think that as we these kind of first 5 rounds kind of look like lots of pieces that if they were moved up a round or 2, I wouldn't blink. And so if I had first opened ADP and seen some of these first rounders actually being drafted in the second round, or some of these second rounders in the third round, or some of these third rounders in the second round, I wouldn't be like, oh, this looks off. And so I just think that things are a lot more mixed up at the top, which again goes back to there's certain years where there's guys who are like, this dude's mispriced, I got to be taking him. And this year I feel like it goes more and more to the strategy, because it's just how am I building this roster? Because there's so much fragility in these top 4 or 5 rounds of where these guys really should belong. And I think that we have an edge in that most content providers don't think or talk that way. Most content providers think or talk in terms of planting their flags on this guy and this guy and this guy and being right on something. Whereas realistically, we can just look and say, okay, there's more uncertainty than normal in these top 4 or 5 rounds. And so it can be less about oh, I got to get my guy, and more about, okay, these are the guys who are here. This is like you mentioned, not typically being able to get Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on a roster together. That means most people typically aren't able to, which means those rosters are less common. And so finding those opportunities to build less common rosters, I think really becomes a more valuable way to approach things.
Yeah. And to your point, it's funny you say that, because with how that all looks, because that's something that I've been saying for a while. So for me, CMC is obviously CMC. And then for me, the top 6 receivers through AJ Brown are kind of separate from everyone else. AJ Brown, top 5 the last 2 years, 6 straight games, 125 yards last season before the Eagles fell on their face. So I put him with those other top 5 receivers. So those top 7 are pretty set, but then you've got Bijan and Breece, who are young, explosive type backs, the mystery box. Could they be the RB1? That's why they kind of sit at the top. But then the rest of the receivers from like Garrett Wilson through Stephon Diggs, and I've been saying this for a while, like it's just one flat tier to me. Like they're all very similar. And obviously because of how ADP works and just like it's a large sample of drafts, there are certain guys who maybe in a projections or ranking system are going to look better. And then that's going to play itself into ADP. And then ADP is going to kind of confirm itself just by all these drafts, people going off ADP, right? But like, yeah, it wouldn't be shocking if out of that tier, 3 or 4 of the top 5 guys are guys who right now are, if DJ Moore and Stephon Diggs were at the top of that group,
that wouldn't surprise anybody. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I mean, DJ Moore.
That tiered drafting approach there's so much value in that, which I think is something you're really good at, is looking at things that way, because it can take some of the bias out of like, this is the range in which I put this guy, as opposed to this guy has been being drafted number 13 overall and I'm getting him at number 17. What a steal. And it's like, but is it, like these guys are all kind of in the same, how do I want to build this particular team? And it might not just be taking that guy who fell, because these guys really don't have a lot that separates themselves. So yeah, that's kind of the main thing that stood out to me. I actually do really like, it would seem like Bijan Robinson isn't going to get, Tyler Algier eating into his touches as much as he did with Arthur Smith. And so I think that he's, one of these guys who you're projecting, but it's like, very clearly I could see him being justifying that top 10 pick. Yeah. Breece Hall's a little bit harder for me, but that's just maybe anti-Jets offense bias of like, what they've been and who that team is. But yeah, I think just in general, that's kind of the big thing that's standing out to me, is like, this is a unique year where the players changing teams, injuries, quarterback changes, all these components really throw a lot of these things up in the air. Also, I've mentioned Saquon a few times, but I would be surprised if the tush push is as effective this year without Jason Kelce. I mean, I think that people are just treating it as a foregone conclusion that Jalen Hurts takes all the touchdowns at the 1 yard line, but I don't think that's necessarily a guarantee. And so I think that that's another thing that people might be sort of mispricing in their calculation of Saquon Barkley's value.
Yeah. And there's also an aspect of it of you now have Saquon Barkley. So do you need to put your $300 million quarterback? I don't care how big he is. Do you need to have him in a pile of bodies with linebackers flying at his head 5 times a game anymore? Like you can probably get that 1 yard by just handing it to Saquon without, putting the franchise at risk with Hurts. I mean, they'll still use it, but to your point, I could see it being less effective and less frequent for sure. Your anti-Jets sentiment segues perfectly into this next question. John is here for the Patriots takes.
Yeah, I mean, don't take them in fantasy. I don't know. I honestly think I think that defense is going to be good. I think that they're going to be. Last year was weird. The team fell apart, and Belichick didn't change his coaching style. So Belichick was still outrageously intense. They practice harder than other teams. They run the hill at the end of practice. You lose. Let's see, Matthew Slater was still there last year, but Edelman's gone, McCourty's gone. Some of these voices that Edelman always talks about when he came in, and Teddy Bruschi was still there, Randy Moss was still there, the Mike Vrabel was still there. The carryover from those, maybe Vrabel was gone, but those carryover from that previous regime and those voices being in the locker room was such a big part of the younger guys buying in. And that was kind of gone last year. And then the team was losing games. And so everything fell apart. But up until week 5 or 6 last year, the Patriots were extraordinarily competitive. I remember that it was a Sunday night or Monday night game against the Seahawks where they took them down to the wire, and DK Metcalf was shoving cornerbacks throughout the game, getting into fistfights because he was getting so frustrated with how physical the Patriots were. I remember the Ravens barely escaped with a win early in the season a couple years ago, and Harbaugh said at the end of the game, you watch, the Patriots are going to be in the thick of the playoff hunt at the end of the year. You guys might think they're a bad team, but this is one of the toughest teams to play. And sure enough, like this was 2 years ago, they just barely missed the playoffs. And so it's like, I think that Gerard Mayo can pull that back together on the defensive side of the ball and have this competitive team that teams are not going to want to play, but their approach to winning games, like that chess match of how we're going to win this game, isn't going to be let's open up the offense. And so I think that you're going to have the Patriots winning more games than people expect and being more competitive than people expect, but more in like a let's manage this game, let's not make mistakes, let's play good defense, let's be a tough opponent for these guys and not beat ourselves. So yeah, it's hard for me to see a lot of spiked weeks coming from that Patriots offense. Maybe Ramondre Stevenson, but I would expect Brissett to play into like week 12, 13, however long the Patriots can say that they're in the playoff hunt before Drake May gets a chance. And so, yeah, that's my take on the Patriots.
Gotcha. Yeah. My early on, my hope with the Patriots, with Drake May, just with his like how he like his archetype and how he profiles was like rookie year Josh Allen, like a physically gifted quarterback who's not like a polished finished product. Doesn't really have like big names around him in his like pass catching core, but like, you know, if they're a team that's struggling for wins or whatever, and then they just like are like, yeah, we're gonna let our young quarterback go to end the year. But the closer we get to the season, the smoke we're hearing about Brissett, and I do agree that, you know, their defense is going to be competitive, and just Belichick's gone, but that like competitiveness of like we're going to compete every week, it's not going to just like disappear overnight. And Mayo's, you know, he was one of those voices for the Patriots. So my excitement for that Josh Allen.
They've become one of those like organizations that has an identity, kind of like the Packers or the Steelers, and that they're going to run things kind of a similar way, even though the regime has changed. And so that idea of like, let's just throw Drake May to the wolves and let him grow from time on the field, which wouldn't be a bad thing necessarily, but I feel like they're likely to take that approach of like, hey, Patrick Mahomes sat a year, Jordan Love sat 4 years, Aaron Rodgers sat 3 or 4 years, whatever it was. Like, let's give him a year on the bench and let's play him next year. Like, that's not going to surprise me at all. I kind of feel like they're going to try to be competitive and treat themselves like a team that can win games, as opposed to a team that's just seeing what they have in their number 3 overall pick that's not good enough to make it onto the field quite yet.
Yeah. Last question, and then I'm sure you're busy. One of our IC members asked, what are your thoughts on Ray Davis and I guess the Bills backfield in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we talked about that already, but I'm with you. I think that, I mean, I really like James Cook, and I think that he's proven himself to be reliable as a pass catcher, reliable as an inside runner, reliable as a blocker. And it just feels like he's going to be the guy on that offense. To whatever extent NFL teams still have a guy who's the guy, 65% snap share, maybe 75% of the touches from the backfield. But, you know, injuries can throw things in a different direction or whatever else. But I don't think James Cook is going to lose that role, right? Like you brought up, he had whatever it was, like around 1,600 yards last year. He's trusted in pass protection. He knows the offense. This is going to have to be like more of a short area precision type of offense at this point. And so James Cook fits really well into that. So I'd be very surprised if he loses his role. And I think it would have to come down to injuries or something else, you know, for him to not have the impact that you were talking earlier about expecting him to have.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I had scheduled you for an hour and a half, so I assume your plate is pretty full. I don't want to hold you too much longer.
I got some emails to send out this afternoon. So fun. This is my least favorite like portion of the year, is like moving into heavy business mode, where it's like the stuff I enjoy the least. But you get a couple weeks of that, and then it's back to research and prep and getting ready for the season. So yeah, man, we've got some fun stuff ahead of us.
Yeah, super excited.
OWS fam, not that you will miss this, but email going out on Friday with some announcements and bringing us into the season. So check your inbox on Friday.
Awesome. Well, it's been a blast, JM. Enjoyed talking with you. Enjoyed catching up, getting some feedback from like fresh eyes, right? Where you've been in the know and you've been like studying enough to have like your takes, but you're not. You haven't been completely tainted by the best ball waters that I've been.
The ADP bias that, yeah, it's like anything. If you see something from an outside perspective, it's easier to see that full picture than from the inside perspective. So, yeah, hopefully I provided some value to viewers, but if not, I just had fun hanging out. So it's not a total loss. Xandamere, good to see you, bud.
Yeah, sorry. I'm also like looking at the chat and trying to figure out the chat client is horrible in this. Apparently, Brandon Ayuk to Pittsburgh is a thing.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun.
Per Cam Marino.
I think he's speculating. I don't think that's like happening.
Per Pittsburgh.
10 minutes ago, he says they've agreed on a trade.
Per Pittsburgh team that isn't going to want to throw the ball a ton because they've got Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin and a good defense. And
I was thinking about drafting a lot of Brandon Ayuk, thinking if either we get a discount that people think he might hold out, or he gets traded. And most places he gets traded to, he probably gets more volume. If San Francisco doesn't get a ton of volume, this goes on efficiency. That would be like one of the few places where his stock would drop.
Yeah.
God.
Well, it's that time of year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So I'm looking it up now, and I see what you're talking about. But then I just saw a thing that said like it was going to be the Browns or the Patriots that would move.
Yeah, I haven't seen it confirmed from like Schefter or one of the big sources, but so
Browns would be a fun one.
Yeah, I think
Browns would be amazing.
Yeah. I think I think if he moves, I think it's kind of like a lateral move for him because he's going to lose that like. I talked about it with Greg from Coach Speak earlier. Like his volume he's had 104 and 112 targets the last 2 years. He probably gets up in that 140 to 160 range if he's put on a different offense where he's like clearly the best option.
But he loses the efficiency.
Probably doesn't. Gets more defensive attention. So
he loses being on the team that scored 28 points a game last year.
Yeah. So
all right, fellas.
All right.
We will talk soon.
Yeah, for sure.
OWS fam. See ya.
Good to see you.
X.
All right.
How we doing?
Oh man, I am doing pretty well. I am excited to start digging back into NFL. It's, and I love baseball, but baseball season is long. So I'm excited to start digging back into NFL. I'm excited to get back to DFS, as people who hang around OWS like Discord a lot know I am no longer in the world of corporate life. And so, that leaves me with, I've been getting bored, like I want to get back to doing something. So it's exciting to get back into football and I miss DFS. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just kind of the same. Well, I've been doing the best ball stuff for 3 months now, but then, combination of that plus like prepping for the season and some different stuff that we're going to be doing this year, and some expanded things that I'm going to be doing. So like kind of a lot going on, but it's like a good busy, my wife's a teacher. So we've got like 2.5 weeks left of like our summer before my daughter goes to preschool. So like, I'm drinking a lot of coffee.
Such a fun time.
But so I mean it's a good thing though. Want to ask you, like, while I'm gonna have one of our Best Ball Plus subscribers coming on to do a draft in a little bit here. Wanted to give you a minute to talk a little bit about our props package, and then also you're like the head of our all our Showdown content for our DFS and Inner Circle package. So you do a lot of other stuff too with ownership projections and all that stuff, but specifically props and Showdown. For some people who maybe are on here just to hear us chat NFL and that sort of thing. Give us a little bit about those two aspects.
Yeah. So I'll start with Showdown. Showdown is a single game format of daily fantasy sports. And so when you think about daily fantasy, the normal structure of a roster you build is pretty similar to season-long fantasy. It's just for one day. You've got a quarterback, you've got a couple of running backs, you've got some wide receivers, a tight end, a flex pick, no defense, or sorry, no kicker. They got rid of kicker everywhere a couple of years ago, thank God. Still a defense. So basically, like, DFS rosters look like season-long rosters, and that was obviously intentional. They wanted to make it so it was easy to transition. You hop over to DFS for the first time. If you're a season-long football player, it looks familiar. Showdown's different because it's just you pick 6 players from a single game, and they have to be at least one from each team. And this format came out, oh my God, I want to say 4 years ago. I don't actually know. I want to say 4 years ago.
I think 4 is when it like really took off.
Yeah,
I think it was. They were like toying with it 5 years ago or maybe 6,
maybe.
but then it was like 4 years ago was when they cut off the Sunday night game from the main slate.
That's right. Yeah, they started reducing the main slate, and they'd already taken the Monday night off a couple years before. Anyway, Showdown is a single game format, and whenever there's a new format, there's inherently going to be edge there because the longer a format exists, the more smart people dive into picking apart the data, trying to figure out how to master that format, right? So full slate DFS, like all Sunday games, like that. It hasn't been solved yet. There's still edge if you're a really good player, but it's not as easy as it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right? It's harder. It's more competitive. People have figured it out. People they haven't solved it completely, but they've gotten better at it. The field's gotten smarter. Showdown is a few years behind that curve because it's a newer format, and Showdown is also not as soft as it was 3 years ago when it was like brand new. But I still personally feel like there's a lot of edge there, and so I write our Showdown content picking apart each game, not just from the perspective of what's likely to happen in the game, as Mike and Hilow and JM and the rest of the OWS content team do for every game on a given week, but I pick it apart from the perspective of a single game tournament slate. And, I still think there's a lot of edge in Showdown because it's very much an ownership-driven game where everyone knows the best plays, right? If you've got the Cowboys playing the Falcons or whatever, everyone knows the best play is CeeDee Lamb. Like, everyone's going to play CeeDee Lamb. He's clearly the best play on the slate. He's going to have the highest projection in anyone's projection system. There's a lot of strategy angles that go into Showdown that are very based on ownership. And because the pool of players is so much smaller, I mentioned Sonic, one of our authors, one of our content writers, won a Millionaire Maker a few years ago using Ryan Griffin, a tight end. I think he was on the Jets at the time, actually. And you don't have to worry about that as much for Showdown because there's just fewer players. So, like, you don't have to get everything. You don't have to cover every possible angle in an entire week of NFL games, right? In order to win a tournament. You generally have to get the perfect roster most of the time in order to win a tournament. You have to get the optimal roster that you could put together, but it's easier to do in a smaller format with fewer players available. And so it's sort of an art of trying to figure out what the balance is of where you, where you try to be different from the field, what you think everyone else is likely to do, but different in a smart way that lets you achieve positive leverage and positive expected value over time. So I think it's still a highly profitable area to be playing in. It's also enjoyable because you don't have to worry about one game. You don't have to follow one game. You don't have to, like, if you ever play DFS and you play through the morning games and you're feeling really good, but you have to wait for the afternoon games and they go horribly for you. And you don't have to, you just go through one game, and it's a fun format. You can get more money in on a given week. There's more slates to play. So if you think, like, there's a lot of variance inherent in the format in DFS, right? Because, like, weird things happen in football. Defenders fall down. The guy scores an 8-yard touchdown, whatever. Like, weird things happen in football. There's a lot of variance inherent in it. And in a season of football, how many Sundays are there, right? There's just not a lot. And so you can be a good player, but just not come out on top over the course of a given season of full slates. But if you have Showdown, also, there's a lot more Showdowns available, right? You've got Thursday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football. You've also got, like, other island games, like when they play in the UK, or the Thanksgiving games. Like, there's just a lot of Showdowns available to play. So it's also a way to kind of just take out some of the variance, some of the luck factor from your overall, like, season results. So it's a really fun format. Yeah. Props. So player props, for those who don't know what a prop is, I think everyone knows what a basic bet is. I bet on the Cowboys to beat the 49ers today, or I bet on the Cowboys to cover, 4.5 points. That's a bet. That's like a market bet, a money line bet, or a spread bet. Those markets are generally viewed as highly efficient. There's lots of money that goes into them. Very, very, very few people can consistently beat those type of betting markets over time. A prop is betting on a player outcome. So I bet that Dak Prescott is going to throw for over or under 272.5 yards. It might be what they line Dak Prescott at. And you can bet that he's going to throw for more or fewer yards than that. You can bet on a running back to, carry the ball a certain number of times to score a touchdown, to rush for over or under a certain number of yards, receiver to catch a certain number of passes, over under. Those are called player props, and they exist for all sports. I'm just using NFL as an example. Because there are so many of them, like think about how many NFL games there are on a weekend, right? There's only so many money line bets out there. But think about how many NFL players are playing on a given weekend and how many player prop lines the books have to make. Props they take less money on. They're smaller markets for books. They tend to view them as like loss leaders, as marketing tools to get customers engaged and get them to come back and get them to load up the book and place bets. They feel like they have to have it because their competitors have it. They just don't put as much effort into those lines, and those lines are just not as sharp because they're not as liquid. There's not as much money going into them, and they have to put up so many more of them. So props are a much easier, more consistent way to be profitable in the betting markets compared to, say, betting spreads or money lines. And so I run our props product. We have a really, really smart team of analysts working on the props product. We place bets across a multitude of sports. I'd say that NBA and NFL are our bread and butter, but we have bets across golf, baseball, college basketball, which was an incredible goldmine for us last week, thanks to our incredibly smart college basketball analyst. Politics, I was talking about, I wasn't joking when I mentioned politics earlier. We've been doing political bets. Like, there's just a lot of ways to make money in the betting markets right now, as betting has expanded so much, right? Growing legalization of sports betting, as well as its expansion of more broadly betting markets on predicting future outcomes. Like, that's what political betting markets are, right? Especially predicting future outcomes of things, of real world events. And those markets are getting so much bigger. It's such a lucrative place to be. So in the last year, in the world of betting, you track your results in what are called units. And so that's meant to equalize. When I say Mike might be rich, being a highly paid high school basketball coach. Mike is super, super wealthy. And so, he might bet a unit for him that he bets, like his regular amount he puts down in a bet might be $1,000. For me, it might be $20 because I'm unemployed outside of OWS right now. So, you track in units in terms of reporting your results. And so last year we returned roughly 250 units. So you can think about that. Like, if you figure out how much you bet normally, if you bet $20, that would be your profit of $5,000. If you bet $100 in a bet, that's a profit of $25,000. So you can think about like how much that might be worth to you. But we're off to our new season. We kind of ended our season for props at the end of NBA season, the end of 2024 NBA season. So we're kind of in a new one that we're starting off. But it's props is a great market to be in. It's consistently profitable for us. And there's a lot of people doing it. It's a competitive market. There's no such thing as a free lunch that lasts forever. My honest belief is that props will not be as lucrative as this in 5 years. But I think there's always edge to be found, right? There's almost always edge to be found. Whenever there's an area where there's money moving around and people making decisions based on money, it's always opportunity to make those decisions smarter than those. I've probably gone over the time Mike was hoping for me to talk about, because I can talk about props for a long time. But I will stop. If you want to learn more about props, though, you can hop in the OWS Discord. There's a link to it on the OWS website at oneweekseason.com. You can chat with myself or other members of our props team if you're curious to learn more about it. Let's do some basketball.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you. A couple things I wanted to add with what you were saying. First, the Showdown stuff. So I'm so into the main slate and my afternoon only, my FanDuel stuff, and just the overall main slate and all. I write the NFL Edge game. So like, Showdown isn't something that like I'm able to put a ton into, but like, to how you do your Showdown write-ups for the Showdown slates, and I guess how you present things, and not a like, okay, just play these guys, but just like laying out scenarios, laying out how you like to make your rules, and how basically kind of the story you're telling with rosters. like that's good for me because I play Showdowns like for fun. I'm more of like a subscriber mindset there. So like for me, I find those really, because like it can be a Monday night, an hour or two before kickoff, and I'll go just pull up your write up and be like, okay, what are the different angles? Yeah, I kind of like that one, and then I'll go kind of make a lineup from that, and I'll go make a lineup from that, and yeah, I'll dig into like, okay, I like this, but I see this little slant too because I know these teams or whatever. But it does so much of like the legwork, which is awesome. And drafters, glad to see you guys tuning in. I don't know if that's Josh or one of the other guys over there. Thank you for watching and all your support. Been pumping you guys all day. I do want to bring up, yes, Drafters has a pick'em product that is really cool. They have season long stuff. They do lots of different different sports. They do like over unders. I'm going to share my screen quick. But they have a pick'em product, so it's like you're talking about props. You can't just bet specifically on one prop, but you can do multiple. So like here, if I wanted to take Aaron Rodgers over passing yards, Anthony Richardson under passing yards, it pays out at 3x. If you do multiple, so if you get up into a higher threshold, you can also do what's called a safety lever, which it changes the payout if you get all of them correctly, but it gives you a little bit of a backstop where you can get one or two wrong and still get somewhat of your money back. So it's pretty cool, especially if you're trying to like dip your feet into it, get a feel for things. So they've got that those are season long ones that I have up right now, but then they also have, once the season goes, they have every week those individual player props and stuff. So definitely check that out. Drafters, in my opinion, the best place to play best ball, and their pick'em product I've found really enjoyable as well.
Yeah. I love their best ball product, and I don't just say that because we're on the stream for them. Like that was where I maxed NFL last year. I did NBA. I did baseball this year. Like it's, I have nothing against Underdog and other spots. There's other companies in the market, right? But Drafters is, I don't know, for what it's worth. For my money, it's the best one.
Oh yeah, and we've been talking about it a bunch today, but like the cumulative scoring, the interface that they have where like you can look up your past drafts, you can look up other people's drafts. Really cool.
Yeah, their interface is the best. Their app is the best. The scoring format, hands down, the cumulative scoring is I think, if you like a lot of extra variance, which you should only like if you think you are a below average player, then play on other sites that offer a playoff.
Yeah,
but I think that
it's wild. It's wild to me every year, week 15 and 16. It's just like it's so noisy on Twitter or X, because my pod luck. I had this awesome team that was averaging 170 points, and now like they had 150 this week and they're done, or they were in the pod with a team that scored 220. It's like, well, like if you one way to avoid that, come on over to Drafters.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's so great. It's it's really the best of both worlds. The 20 rounds, the scoring format, the full PPR. I just love everything about it. With that said, we are going to get into a draft. I'm going to bring on a Best Ball Plus subscriber, Michael, or El Loco as we know him in the Discord. How you doing today?
Good. How are you guys?
Terrific.
I recognize that name.
Yeah, I just want to give a quick. X, I think, did a good job, but I'm a prop subscriber, so everything he was saying, join up if you like money.
Yeah, there you go. Testimonials. So El Loco, looks like you are drafting from the 8th spot. AJ Brown, Drake London, Evans, Flowers, Rice, and Cook to start out. So I like the wide receiver heavy build so far. Obviously, we're getting into, we're hopping on kind of partway on. I guess, we've talked a lot about player takes, or, about players, about different stuff for drafters. Again, if anyone is first coming on, drafters cumulative scoring. It is full point PPR. This contest is $15 entry, $500,000 to first, $2.5 million overall prize pool. What for you, Michael? What is your experience? I guess give some feedback or your thoughts on. You can go whichever order you want. Drafters and then your Best Ball Plus experience.
So I guess I'll start with drafters. I think just the interface, it's super easy to draft on mobile. It's super easy to draft on computer. And especially, now I'm at like 88 drafts. So depending on how things go, I'm going to need to start doubling up, drafting a couple drafts at once. And Drafters is really the only site I like doing that on. So that's pretty fantastic. Also, their customer support's really good if you ever have a problem. Not that I've ever really run into anything. But I think I would just echo everything you guys said. Like last year was the first time I really did. That was the first year you guys had the best ball product. So I kind of joined in and went for, I think I probably had like 250 drafts across multiple platforms. Mm-hmm. I think I got up to like 100 on Drafters because I started kind of late. I think I'm gonna take Ferguson here. Yeah, we're gonna do that. And I think kind of lost my train of thought, but yeah, I think one of the reasons why I did start to do so much volume is because of all the stuff Mike was talking about with drafters, and I think it's the only. Really, I haven't been able to find any drafters content. I mean, sometimes you'll see other sites or like other podcasts jump on a drafters draft, and they're always remarking at like how different ADP is, and they don't really explain why. So to me, I think we do as OWS subscribers do have an edge because we kind of understand. I mean, even if you look at this draft, I mean, there's a lot of people who haven't done a ton of drafts, but they're not. I don't think Mike would be happy with a majority of the drafts.
I'm loving the guys. There's 2 different players who drafted multiple QBs in the first 5 rounds, which is a bold choice.
3 teams are dead right now.
Yeah. Wait, which is the other one? I didn't see. Scroll up.
I'm gonna go.
Let him make his pick first.
Yeah, I'm going running back here.
So take Najee.
That's what I was gonna do. Najee, I have a huge.
Well, and especially right now with
the Ayuk thing.
If the Ayuk news is right, that offense could be a lot more efficient. So there could be more running back opportunities for scores. Now EX wanted you to scroll up.
I'm just curious what other team's dead. I didn't notice. But yeah, let's see.
Like up on the draft. There you go.
Can you see?
Yeah.
What team are you viewing as dead? Is it team 5?
Yeah, 3, 5, and 10.
Yeah.
And
so again, maybe we can dig into
subscribers know all the reasons why, but yeah.
We can dig into why they're dead, but point is I mean, if you're drafting right now, oh my God, 3 is super dead. I just noticed he has 1 wide receiver. Oh my God.
One of the other cool things anybody new that's not as familiar with drafters is you can see the little numbers next to each person drafting. That will tell you what number of draft it is for that person. So especially the last week or so, I've seen a lot of first-time drafters, and not to what you said as far as the feeling like we have an edge. I think if you're going to start drafters, I also would recommend you check us out. So like today, right now, we have our price dropped to $129. We have our code Best Ball Marathon for an extra $30 off today, so $99. It gets you a Best Ball Plus subscription. You get all the training sessions, everything we've done since May. And for drafters specifically, there's like 14 of them now. You can go back and listen to them all. on 1.5 or 2x speed, and really it's just a few car rides and you'll have heard it all. But like don't like sign up for drafters first of all, but then if you're going to do that, don't be the guy that comes in and it's your first draft and we can tell it's your first draft very clearly. Get that help and kind of make the most out of that expected value. So here's kind of my pitch to everyone is, if you sign up for drafters using code OWS, you get 100% match on your first deposit up to $100. So you put $100 on, you're going to get $200 to play with. You're going to save $100. Now take that $100, go buy an OWS Best Ball Plus subscription. You're going to have $200 to play with. You'll have actually made $1, and you'll be in a great spot, like probably one of the highest EV spots you'll find yourself in when it comes to best ball and DFS. So that's my pitch.
So, Mike, I'm actually going to ask you, because I'm on the board now, I'm looking at Love. This is a pretty QB-heavy room. I don't have anybody, I mean, maybe Musgrave late. Otherwise, I was going to take Spears or Ford. Just curious. We're taking Love, baby.
I'm fine with Love, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I don't have a ton of them either, so.
Yeah, and I'm just high on him from so Greg from Coach Speak. I don't know if you watched the earlier portion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he had a nice his analogy he used for Jordan Love was and then the Packers receivers was you can get the syrup and you don't have to figure out which pancake. The syrup, like being Love, he's gonna cover all of them. So that's an interesting analogy that I'll remember. It's one of those things it sticks in your mind. So you're coming back up here. Let's see, you got 5 receivers there.
I'm tempted by, I don't think oh, well, there goes Shakir. I was tempted by Shakir. I was listening to JM, kind of caught the tail end of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a guy on the street, so I won't try to get player takey here, but I really like him. I think he's interesting, especially in this format. I'm going to take, so I'm also a Cleveland guy, so I'm going to grab Ford there. I have a ton of Cleveland. We don't have the most reliable beat writers, but there's a lot of excitement about the passing attack out there.
In Cleveland?
Yeah.
Yeah. And like Watson, JM said it best, like not speaking about him as a human being, but like just from like a player perspective, like it's not that long ago. I play a lot of Dynasty and he was like a top 2 or 3 quarterback and by extension, super flex asset overall. And obviously he wasn't great last year, but it's not out of the realm. And you've got some guys, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, even like Elijah Moore. Pappy is hitting me up. It looks like the Ayuk to Pittsburgh stuff is legit.
Is that real?
Yeah. Michael, sorry, I kind of like cut you off there, but did you have any more feedback on drafters or OW or Best Ball Plus?
I mean, I would just say, in general, I think that what you want, most of us, if you're playing this level of best ball, are either, you're some level of degenerate, but if you really love drafting this much, like you probably have a pretty extensive fantasy football background. Like I'm in a ton of home leagues, dynasty leagues, whatever. And I think what can get lost in the best ball ecosystem is you do, at the end of the day, you need to have some strong player takes. And I think that what OWS does really well is it lets people, it doesn't become overwhelming with the player takes, because sometimes in the industry they'll be like, oh, you gotta take this guy, you gotta take this guy. I mean, I'm hearing like so much Devin Chan talk. And I'm just like, yeah, but if I kind of want to do this structure, then I'm just going to do the structure, even if. And so OWS, I think, they explain the structure, they explain the player takes, and then they kind of let you make your own decision. And I never feel, pressured by any of the content. I never walk away from a podcast going like, oh my God, I'm screwed. Like my portfolio is screwed. It's always, okay, if I want to implement this is something I can do.
It's less about the players and it's about the strategy and the roster you build. So also on that, like content is tricky. Like I'm listening to other content and I want to share a story if I may. When I was learning about like the world of finance and mutual funds and all that, it's really common practice. And I don't actually know if it still is, but for a long time, it's really common practice that as the end of like mutual funds had to file a report with their holdings, I believe every quarter, every period of time, whatever it was. I think it was a quarter. And it was common that mutual funds would go and buy the best performing stocks from the most recent period of time, quarter, whatever they reported on, at the end of the quarter if they didn't already own them. Because at the end of the quarter, they wanted to be able to say, oh, yes, look, of course we owned NVIDIA. Of course we owned Apple. Of course we owned whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's called window dressing. And I feel like there's some amount of that in the content analyst space where there's some amount of like chasing last year's results. Oh, of course we want HN because HN had these really huge games off of a relatively small number of touches on multiple occasions last year. And that's not to say he can't do it again. Of course he can, right? He's clearly a highly efficient player on a highly efficient speed-based offense. But saying like Devon Achane is really fast and can score from anywhere is not really a super thoughtful, this will help you build good rosters take, right? Like everyone knows that. Everyone knows Devon Achane is really fast and everyone knows he can put up 25-point games on 12 touches because we saw him do it multiple times. And so there's some amount of like chasing what we saw last year in the content space because you don't want to be the one analyst who's out on an island being like, no, don't draft Devon Achane or whatever. Because like everyone else saying to draft him, then you look like the idiot, right? Like regardless of what happens, even before the season, everyone's like, oh, this guy's the idiot. Don't listen to his content because content's competitive, right? And so if everyone likes Achane, there's also a lot of pressure on you as a content creator to like Achane too, because you don't want to be the one guy that everyone else makes fun of and stops watching your content because you're the one dude who doesn't like the guy that everyone else likes. So point being is just be careful of the super strong player takes in the content world because there's more groupthink that goes into that than I think. And I see Mike nodding because he's in the content world, so he sees it. If you're not in sort of the content space, there's more of that groupthink pressure. And I've found myself in that spot before. I've found myself like being like, oh, of course I have to like this guy, and be like, wait a second, what am I doing? Like, do I really, or is it just because everyone else does? So.
Yeah,
a slight tangent, but I'd say don't worry too much about, what analysts are saying about player takes, right? In the long term, player takes are overrated. In the long term, player takes become table stakes, right? Like we all have access to the same data to evaluate if a player is likely to do well or not. We all have access to the same tape, the same, metrics. In the long run, the strategy angle is the much more important factor whether or not you're going to be successful.
Well, and to that point, I do my player grid for our DFS product every week. And there was multiple times last year where I'd have a subscriber hit me up in Discord, whether it was just in a channel or DM, like, hey, I noticed you didn't have this X player, like some running back in your player grid. What you don't think aren't they going to touch the ball a lot? And don't you think? And I'm like, well, I'm not gonna be the guy who lists 14 running backs, right? Like I generally list 5 or 6 guys. These are the guys I like the most. Most weeks, I'm gonna miss a couple guys that have good weeks that aren't in my player grid, but I'm not gonna chase or I'm not gonna try to be that guy who window dresses and lists so many guys because to make sure that I've got all the bases covered or whatever.
And then you could be, oh yeah, we were totally on that guy.
Oh yeah, look at my I like it more when it's hey, I have 5 running backs, and at the end of on Sunday night you can look at it and be like, hey, 4 of those 5 guys scored at least 14 points, and 2 of them were over 22 points. I know that eventually I'm going to have the right combination of things. Whatever, but I'm not I want to actually deliver value, not just pretend that I'm delivering value. So if that makes sense, and hopefully isn't taken as a shot by anyone else in the industry. But the one other thing, and this might be taken as a shot by others, but the one other thing I want to bring up is and I brought this up in one of our private training sessions for our feed. What I think is unique about what in our Best Ball Plus product and what I'm doing with drafters is I started providing this content last year and talking about some of these strategies. I've expanded them and dug deeper into them now this year. But last year, I dove into it. I was pumping it up, talking about like how to approach it. And then I went and won, right? Whereas, again, this isn't like directed at anyone specific. It's just like the overall, like what our industry looks like. How many of the other people that are like really like the big voices, like they won in like a highly variant format, and then now, oh look, like I'm like I'm the voice. Like I'm, they're the guys who are providing content and are viewed as like, I guess I'm saying I backed it up as opposed to just like, oh, I won and now I'm trying to cash in.
Yeah, you want to see it the other way around, right? I think you want to see as every year someone's going to win, right? It'd be like if we go interview the person who won the Powerball lottery last week and be like, would you start a new service recommending Powerball numbers for people to pick, right? Like, because you won, you clearly must be good at it, right? Like that's ridiculous. But if someone came out and said, I have a system for beating the lottery, and then went out and did it and consistently showed that they were good, then maybe be like, maybe there's something to that, Like,
yeah. And
I want to come back around to the roster real quick, if I may, for a minute. Michael, one thing I noticed, and this is a bit of a leading question, so sorry. There's not a lot of correlation on your roster, right? We talk a lot, or a lot of people in best ball, a lot of strategy and content in best ball focuses on the importance of stacking, right? Like you want to build stacks, you want to build correlated rosters because, if an offense does well, multiple players on that offense are likely to have good seasons. If they have a big game, like if a receiver has a big season, there's a good chance he brings his quarterback with him, vice versa. If the quarterback has a big season, he probably brings a receiver along with him. I'm not seeing much correlation on this roster. Can you just talk through your thought process and how you're thinking about correlation in this draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is drafters. I mean, it's all the money's up top. So some of it, I think you do kind of have to aim to be not perfect, but you're kind of hoping for. I'm really hoping that like Mike Evans just scores like 15 touchdowns and Baker Mayfield like randomly runs in like 4 touchdowns. So stuff like that. I mean, I think there's a little bit of correlation there, but on drafters, I don't try it as much, and I think I'm hoping that's consistent with what Mike's teaching. I mean, like on DraftKings, where I spend most of my time, I'll have 4, 5, 6 guys try to do all the week 17 stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think part of it, the other part of it is there are some drafts I have where I have a lot of correlation, but I try not to chase too much. I think one thing I did last year was I wasn't, humble enough. I was like, well, I know this guy. And like, I ended up having like a crazy amount of like J.K. Dobbins and Mike Williams. And I was like chasing those guys up the draft board. And obviously there's some bad luck there, but at the same time, having like 30% of Mike Williams and J.K. Dobbins maybe wasn't the best process decision.
I was with you on the high Mike Williams.
So I do try to, I try to keep to the board as much as I can.
Mike, did I tee that up well with the leading question?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was perfect. And like, so to what Michael's talking about, like there are commonalities that we've seen among top 10 rosters, commonalities we've seen among top 100 rosters. And then I've dug a lot into, over the last 4 or 5 years, kind of the modern NFL as we know it, back testing, like specifically at the wide receiver position, what do the ADP, like what ADP range provides returns at a certain level? And I don't want to get like too deep into the weeds because it's like premium content, but like there are certain things that like take precedent over the stacking, that take precedent. And it doesn't mean you can't stack, but as far as like you need to have certain makeups of your players, like that make up your roster to have a chance at first. and again, that's where it's like, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, so to speak. But like, you can't, like, you can cash by having some other approaches. But one of the things I like to bring up is like, basically our target in this contest is going to be 2,800 points. The winning roster last year in the Drafters Million, I don't want to say this wrong. So the winning roster, when I took 7th, the winning roster scored 2794. And then in their mini contest, which was their $3 entry, the winning roster scored 2836. So basically, like, and it's a bigger contest this year. I'm sharper. Our OWS fam is sharper. Other people are probably like figuring out, it's like anything. Like, just because people may not like have all the stuff that I've figured out doesn't mean like in general, like most of the serious drafters are drafting sharper than they did a year ago on Drafter. So like, it's not that it's unbeatable, but 2,800 is kind of like the target. Like, you need to build a team that can score 2,800 points over 17 weeks. And in order to do that, I guess I'll say this, I guess this will be one thing, but like on Underdog and DraftKings, there's so much value in drafting a roster that stacks specifically premium teams, right? Because they have that huge weekly ceiling. Whereas on drafters, I think it's kind of the opposite, in that it's almost like if you're spending that much capital on an expensive team, it's going to be hard for that team, unless it's by far the best offense in the history of the NFL, to give you the output that you need from all those players.
Yeah, one or two, like two duds where the 49ers score 16 points instead of 30 is really hard to make up for if you have 4 49ers or 5 49ers, right?
Yeah, well, and just from like the standpoint of like the season-long output and you're less likely if you take and now I guess Ayuk's gone, but if you had all, like last year, there were teams that had three of the 49ers and Purdy. And obviously they were in great shape, but they were all being drafted later. This year, to do it, you'd have to have your first 3 rounds picks. Well, there's probably going to be someone who, with a similar roster but whichever of the 2 wide receivers was like a lower guy, they're going to beat you with whatever other receiver in that range scores.
Michael kind of said it too, right? Like, you have to think about differentiation, and given that the drum that's being banged in the best ball and most of the best ball content space is stack, 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 stack. And to be fair, stacking is much more relevant in playoff based formats. And this is again where there's an edge playing on drafters, because drafters format is different and most places are not creating content specifically for drafters. So what people are doing is taking the general best ball content they're listening to or reading that's more applicable to a playoff based format, and they're just doing it here. They're just doing it to drafters because best ball's best ball, better stack. And so there's even just some differentiation, just not stacking or just not really heavily chasing stacking is a way to create differentiation, right? So like, you have Baker Mayfield with Mike Evans, awesome. And you have Kate Otten, awesome. You could have added Chris Godwin to that stack, but see, who did you draft around there? Rice, right? Like Rice you drafted around where you normally would have gotten Godwin. And so is it feasible to foresee a scenario in which, Evans and Otten and Mayfield have strong seasons, but Rice outscores Godwin? Sure is. But guess what? Most people who are building Tampa stacks would have gone Godwin there instead of Rice. Not everyone necessarily, but it's one small lever you pull that achieves a bit of differentiation. And it's just another example of why you have edge on this particular site playing on drafters that you wouldn't have on another site. And like, I can't match Mike for, NFL knowledge player takes, but the strategy side, that's where the strategy and construction stuff, that's what's super interesting to me. And that's where I feel that I'm good at best ball at DFS is I'm good at the strategy angle, the construction angle, not so much the player angle, but like the to stack or not to stack is a really interesting question. And it's, if you recognize that a differentiation is important, then forever, like if you knew that, like let's say I told you that 99% of rosters in this tournament were going to have a stack of 4 or more players from one team. 99%. Obviously it's fake, right? But if I said that, if I told you that, you would correctly say, aha, the smart thing to do is not stack then, right? Because I can be different than 99% of other rosters. But if I told you only 20% of rosters are going to stack, then it becomes more valuable to stack and get the benefit of that correlation, because it's not just about the raw point projection that you're getting. It's about it's about you. At the end of the day, you win with 2,800 points, yes, but you also win by outscoring everyone else, right? Like, and Mike, the 2,800 points is historically about what's been needed, but you also have to beat everybody else, right? And so that's what really matters. And so, what everyone else is doing is relevant to your strategy. And so, like, that's kind of why I asked the question, Michael, as I wanted to see. I kind of thought you were going to go that direction, your answer, and I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's where you have the law of large numbers, right? So like to what you're saying and our DFS product, like you're not trying to score the most points, you're trying to beat all your opponents. On a 1 week season, shout out OWS, on a 1 week season in that one specific week, we see it in DFS all the time. There's weeks when 200 points wins a GPP. Those lower scoring weeks actually are usually when I win or have my best weeks. And there's weeks where, 230 points doesn't get you in the top 15, just because of how that like fluctuates. Now, over the large sample size of the 17 weeks, and with 20 players on a roster, that kind of levels out a bit. So like you can expect that 2,800 to be roughly right over the large period. But to your point, like how you get there, how those points accumulate, just look at last year, for example, Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua. Puka had a 250 or I don't know the exact number, but he was a top 5 wide receiver on the season. He's like at his price in the 17th to 20th round. That's like so rare. And I talk about in our subscription, I talked about how rare that really is. But like him and then Kyron is like, he wasn't even drafted in like probably half the drafts last year because he really came on late. He's an 18th to 20th round pick. Well, he was the RB2 in points per game. He's the only guy besides CMC that averaged over 20 PPR points a game. So like, if you don't have those guys, and then they were very common on those top rosters. So if you don't have those guys, if you don't have anyone who has those types of like severe season-long outlier seasons, it could have been 2,700 won the roster the contest last year. So yeah, for sure. Really interesting. Michael, you want to talk a little bit about your roster?
Yeah. So I guess, this one, I know this stream kind of started after, but I've been trying actually to you let the room do what it does, but I've been trying to go less zero RB recently, but this one I think just kind of fell together pretty nicely. Looks like I got some falling values. Especially I was having to get Marshawn Lloyd with Love. I don't know. I was thinking about not taking Sam Darnold, not to talk about the paywall stuff, but just being comfortable, I think, with trying not to hit every position, kind of letting maybe see if Jordan Love and Baker Mayfield could do it by themselves. But I'm hoping Darnold, actually ends up playing 11, 12, 13 weeks. And then that could be really fantastic, even though he's not necessarily guaranteed to do all that well. And then the last thing, I guess one thing I just wanted to ask is, are you guys adjusting anything with, I don't know if you've talked Titans at all, but have you brought Treylon Burks back into the fold at all, or is he just kind of as like a 20th round dart throw?
I mean, I think he'd be all right. I see him as more of a 20th round dart throw on DraftKings than on drafters. Just because he is like, he's a former first round pick, like physically he's very gifted. We do think like the Titans offense is going to throw more than they have in the past. I think Will Levis is better than people think. They've got some good backs, good coaching. So like, I think they could be good, but like to him, I see Burks as like, maybe Hopkins misses a week or two, or maybe like later in the year, one or two veteran receivers is out. And Burks could be like a perfect late round, like a guy who gives you 1 or 2 weeks at the right time. I don't really see a scenario where he like gets that role and then over a long period is just like that good. I don't, it's possible for sure. I mean, there you go. I just did it. I just covered myself. Hey, I said it was possible. I'll stick to my guns. I'm going to say no. He's not a guy I'm looking at on drafters. On DraftKings, I will though. Because he makes sense, especially like to the stacking question. Like if I have Will Levis as my QB2 on a team, and it's the 20th round, Burks is a guy who he does have the profile where a 25-point game at some point wouldn't be surprising at all.
Yeah, I mean, that was the only. I mean, I feel like the board kind of just. I feel pretty good about it. Felt pretty nicely. Don't have too many bye week issues or anything like that. So
I like the Tolbert and Ferguson connection there. That was when I talked about that kind of concept on last week's training session, I believe, with those like ancillary pass catchers.
The Gesicki, or whatever.
Yeah. So same kind of thing. Obviously, Ferguson's more expensive there, but diving into like our tenants with like usable weeks, points added sort of thing. Definitely, like I like how you tied that late round pick together.
I just want to. My favorite pick of the draft that since we started streaming it was actually the Ferguson pick, because I feel like you were looking at some other picks, and I kind of thought you were going to go with one. You went Ferguson, and I just thought that was a really smart pick because we talk about tiers a lot, right? And Mike was talking about tiers earlier, and Mike and JM talked about tiers of the late first, early second round wide receivers. Getting the last guy in a tier is extremely. Ferguson was clearly the last guy in that tight end tier to me, and getting the last guy in a tier is super valuable if you think about like the separation from one tier to the next, right? And think about the production gap in that separation over the course of an entire cumulative season. And he didn't have an earlier tight end, so he's not expecting to get elite level production from the tight end position. He didn't have like an Andrews or Kelsey or whatever. So he's looking at sort of second tier production from the tight end position. He was the last second tier tight end. And if you hadn't drafted him, then you're probably drafting 4 tight ends, or you're drafting 3 tight ends, and it's very much to like cross your fingers and pray for that position sort of situation. Yeah. So I thought that was a really good pick that addressed the clearest need in your roster at a time when I think it was tough to make a tight end pick, because you only had one running back at the time, and there were a lot of good running backs on the board. Like Mostert was like running backs with upside were on the board. Like Mostert, I don't remember who else was there. But there were several running backs with significant upside on the board, and with only one running back, I thought it was probably difficult to go away from running back right there. And I think that was the right thing to do, to go to tight end.
I also with quarterback and tight end, especially now, like I was scared specifically of the double quarterback guy. I figured, he was going tight end just to fill up all his spots. So with the onesie positions, especially in August and September, I do try to be a little more conservative, just because, not that going 4 tight ends is the worst thing in the world, but I try not to risk it that much with all the newbies coming in.
Yeah, it just becomes unpredictable, right? Like I talked about it earlier. Like there was a stretch where most people who were drafting were all like pretty serious drafters. So like it was a sharper room, which was tougher in some senses, but like you also knew like I can take this guy here because I know these couple guys from this other position will be available when I pick again. Whereas now, like, you don't know, like the wide receivers could go earlier. You could have a run of like 8 running backs in a round where they don't normally go. Quarterbacks, I've seen within the last week, I've seen Kyler Murray go as high as like pick 65.
Yeah.
I've seen Kyler Murray go as low as pick like 89. So like, there's just like a wide range depending on your room that you get in.
He went like pick what, 51 at the very end, right?
Oh, there we go. So my range is even bigger.
Yeah, where's that? Is that 51?
I was looking for him. I'm like, hey, I know he's around here somewhere, but yeah, okay.
To the guy who already had Josh Allen, mind you.
Yeah, there you go.
So.
Super flex. Yeah, no.
And that guy went 3 QB too. The guy who drafted Allen and Kyler. Nice.
Early. So he took his second receiver in the 12th round. So
yeah. So I'm not here to like make fun of this poor guy, right? Like he doesn't know what he's doing, and that's not his fault. But point is if we're here to win money, if we're trying to take this seriously as a, even if you're playing it as a hobby, but you want to play it as a hobby where you feel like you have a good chance of being profitable at it, you want soft competition, right? You want competition who doesn't know what they're doing. And I'm not here to mock this poor dude. Like, he clearly is not. He's clearly new to best ball, and I hope he learns, and I hope he grows and becomes successful. But right now he's not. You want players like this in your drafts.
Yeah.
Like, yes, sometimes it's frustrating when they take the pick that you were going for that fits your roster, and you're like, that's a dumb pick. It doesn't fit your roster at all. Why do you do that? I hate that guy. But overall, you want players like that in your drafts.
Yeah, and I think like that's the thing too is like this roster, like he could cash. He could finish. So it pays top 16.7% of a full field. I don't think it's going to fill. So like really it's paying like the top 20 to 25% of whatever the final fill number is. It's like he could easily be a top 20, 25% team with that roster doing a lot of things that I'm saying don't do. But like there's basically no way that roster is going to get to 2,800 points. Like there's just like, even if everything breaks the best possible way, like it's just not it's not in the cards. Yeah, I think, Michael, while we've got you, do you have anything else you want to ask, to talk about drafters or OWS? The stage is yours, my friend.
No, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I've been following along as much as possible with the live stream, and so I just encourage everybody to make sure they watch as much as possible, because there's been a lot of good stuff, especially from some OWS voices like Pappy and JM and now X. So no, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity. PayJ44, come down to OWS. That'd be how I sign up.
We'll chat with you, buddy.
Yeah.
Hey, you can make $1 and have, and be, or no, he's already on, so he can't get the $100 bonus. But, I think that it's been fun too, like in interactions with like you and other members over the last like couple months, seeing like your thought processes like naturally evolve to where like you're thinking about these things. Like it's funny because like our training sessions, like Hilow and I, and Hilow's like waiting in the on deck circle here. I'm going to bring him on in a second. But actually I'll just bring him on now. But what's up, Hilow?
It's a party now.
$4.
Like, yo, our training sessions we do, it's like, it's kind of weird because it's solo. So you're just like talking to yourself for like 45 minutes. And sometimes I'm like, it's like you go to a restaurant and like you get done and there's like, oh, nobody told me there was something in my teeth. Like that. It's like I'm talking, but I don't have like anybody like nodding or agreeing, or there's no conversation. So I'm like, do I just sound like an idiot?
Or, yeah. I don't know. I just picture myself naked.
I picture you naked as well.
That's what I figured. Yeah, that's what I figured.
But so it's rewarding for me to like hop in the Discord and see the conversations happening, even when like I'm not on there for a day and you guys are talking about concepts that like I've been driving home, and it's like, oh yeah, like they get it. They're not just like, oh yeah, okay. Like they're like, yeah, that's what I think is cool about, I guess, our philosophy and approach in general.
Yeah, and even more than that, like we don't present it as like we have all the answers, right? Because we don't. Like this game is there's so many intricacies in this game that like we just want to kind of train the mind to be thinking about things in ways that a lot of people aren't, which is kind of the thesis of what we're trying to do here is just train the thought process, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Mike and Hilow, I want to ask you guys something, and tell me if you think I'm right or wrong, because I'm not as savvy about best ball as you guys are. I've thought of best ball, especially on drafters. I mean, this strategy is clearer on on playoff based formats, but especially on drafters, I don't tend to think about stacking as aggressively for early round picks or early round offenses. I tend to think about it more for late round, for teams that are where the bulk of the offense goes late, because my general thought process is I think this team as a whole is going to do better than the market is pricing them at. Like the 49ers are probably going to score a lot of points. The 49ers players as a group are priced at such a premium that, as you mentioned, Mike, they have to score a ton of points for them to pay off. And even if they score a ton of points, it's likely not going to pay off. Like you probably can't draft the whole offense and have it pay off because of where they're priced. But say a team like the Panthers or the Titans, right? There are teams that are where their offenses are extremely cheap, or they're cheap except for one player, like say the Saints. Those teams are teams I think are more interesting to stack because essentially you can make a relatively inexpensive bet, inexpensive in terms of draft capital in a given draft, to say, I think this team is going to be more successful than the market thinks. The market is pricing them as a bottom third team, and I think they're a middle third team. They don't have to be the top scoring team in the league. They're going to be a middle third team, and I can get all their players cheaply enough that where they're priced, I don't have to think as much about getting the exact right player at the right spot. I can just think I'm going to invest heavily in this offense, and if this offense as a whole does better than the market is pricing them at, then I'm in a good spot. And so like the Panthers seem like a good spot there. The Texans were obvious like the nut spot last year where like none of their players were expensive and they just went ham. Is it likely we get another spot like that happens this year? Probably not, right? That seems like a pretty outlier performance where like guys like Nico Collins and Tank Dell were like just absolutely elite tier NFL receivers. But, could we get like the Panthers, who were last in the league in points scored last year? Could they be 15th? Maybe that's aggressive. Maybe 20th? Or the Titans. I think the Titans are really interesting this year. Do you think that's a viable strategy to think about it in terms of like offenses rather than just players?
So I'll jump on that. I'll jump on it first. The way that I think that question was phrased is very binary, as in like a team is either going to finish top 5 or they're not, right? Like in scoring. But there's that range of outcomes discussion, I think, that comes into that. So like the real answer is probably like it depends, but it depends on so much that like we can't really like get through all those outcomes in our mind. So like, yeah, there might not be a Texans this year. Like there might not be a team that is their top skill position player like is drafted outside the top 7 rounds, and then they have 3 that finish the end of the season in the top 12 of their position and points per game. But like the Titans are a good example. Like they could finish in the top half of the league in scoring, and they're currently projected for like bottom 5, right? Another team, the Panthers, maybe, right? They get the quarterback and running back whisperer in Dave Canales. I think the way that I'm trying to simplify that in my mind is like, we don't know what the answer is going to be. The answer to the test is like where these offenses, how they do at the end of the season. But we know that it's not like this, like yes or no equation. Like there's all this range of outcomes, and we also don't know like what week in a playoff style format, what week are those points going to be scored, or in a cumulative scoring format, are they going to, like as an offense like the Titans, are Nuke and Calvin Ridley going to ping pong weeks where one is like finishing top 24 and they're not doing it together. So there's so many outcomes that like the way that I'm trying to just simplify it is like get exposure to a lot of different ways that this season could play out. So like,
hey, I'm gonna interrupt you quick. Michael's got to go, so I want to. I think he doesn't want to be abrupt and just Irish goodbye and just disappear here. But want to thank him for joining. Thank him for everything, just being a part of the OWS fam and all his support and kind words today. So, Michael, thank you, and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards this DFS season, and then, of course, in December and January.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, bro.
See you, Michael. Nice to chat with you.
Okay, back to it.
I don't even know, dude. I'm just talking. No, it's like, I think just to simplify it into like what we're doing and how what we're doing is we're trying to simplify it as like yes or no. Like we're trying to make it a 1 or a 0, a binary equation where it's like there's this wide range of outcomes, right? So I don't know, like there could be value in attacking those offenses heavily on a single roster. There also could be value in like taking different pieces that you think will outperform current expectations. From like I posted this lineup that I drafted today because obviously I'm drafting one fast draft drafters every day because you get a nice little 3 ticket back at the end of the month if you draft 30 of them this month. So do that, get the streak for that. Shout out to drafters. That's an awesome promo. But my draft today, like I had like 3 Cincy skill position players. So I had like Chase Brown, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow. And I also had like 3 Rams skill position players. So like that could be a case where like those 2 offenses, is it within their range of outcomes to each finish in the top, like, or could those be the top 2 scoring offenses this season? Like maybe, I don't know. It could happen. In that case, like the field probably isn't doing that in a cumulative scoring. That's more of a like playoff style format, like thought process is like, oh, this team could score 42 in week 16. And then you like had to have them. Right. But like, if those 2 teams do finish like 1 and 2 in scoring, like for it could happen, right? It's not likely, but it could happen. Then that roster is probably set up a little bit better than others. So like on the Rams, I had Matthew Stafford and like Cooper Kupp, obviously, and then like Demarcus Robinson and
he's gonna finally get up to where you have him ranked.
Yeah, I know. I was up to like 70% through 300 drafts. That's down to like
you saw the Puka stuff, right?
Yeah. And I took anyway.
I think he's gonna be all right, but there's like Kupp's gonna jump now. Like I did draft earlier, he went like 15.
Yeah. So like I have very little Puka because he was like the first name coming off the board across the board, like on all formats, that was a tier 2 player. It was like Garrett Wilson and Puka Nacua. Like everything after AJ Brown. AJ Brown is like the end of the tier 1 guys for me. It's one big tier until you get to like the end of the 3rd round. So I was like, okay, well, I'll bypass him and mix some of these other guys if I have a 11th or 12th pick.
Did you watch the JM? Did you watch JM earlier?
I caught like the first half hour, and then I had to go to the store
because he's got like the fresh view. Like he doesn't draft. Yeah. So like he was like saying how he like it was his first dive in and looking at ADPs and stuff. Yeah. And it's great because it's what me and you have been saying since like May. Is he's like, yeah, I just feel like this, like the first, like the end of the first round and then the second and most of the third is all like, it's all they all are interchangeable. I'm like,
it's one big tier.
Basically. So it was just funny to hear him like coming in and having that same observation.
Yeah, it's like everyone points to last year where it was like CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown. They were like at the 1-2 turn the entire season, and they turned out to be like the optimal combination in that range. But this year, it's like Puka and Marvin Harrison Jr. Well, it's like I'm below consensus on both those players based on ADP right now. And this is like one massive tier. Let me just get a little weird with all my like 12th picks that I roll.
Is it fair to say the 1-2 turn feels way riskier this year compared to last year?
Yeah,
like 100%. Way riskier.
So it's harder for me on multiple levels because of, especially on drafters, like you're after that top tier for your first round pick. So then you're basically getting kind of 2 of the same tier players at the 1-2 turn as the people drafting at the 2-3 turn are getting.
The problem is that the first round pick gets 2 of those same tier players also.
What's that? Yeah, right. So, but then you get hit again because, especially on drafters with their format and scoring, when you get back to the 3rd, 4th round, you're after like a teardrop of receivers to where now like the receivers that are there for you at that point are very similar to the guys that are available at the 5-6 turn. And then if you take running backs or like Kelsey Laporta are there, so if you go that direction, now you've kind of put yourself in a bit of a bind from a structural standpoint for what we know about drafters and my historical dive. So that's actually, I'll leave it there because I'm talking about how I'm handling kind of the theory I've formulated for handling that the rest of the way.
I gotta go dig into that, Mike. I'm gonna go find that content now because that's something I was looking at it. Like I just started looking at best ball and like for this season. I remember last year. I think it was like I was fine with the first 3 picks because it was like Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson, which I thought were all really strong picks. And then I was but then it was like 4 through 12 were all kind of, they all had their advantages and disadvantages, but they all felt viable to me, right? Like this year, I feel like any team drafted in the first 7 picks, like it's a material edge to be in the first 7 picks versus picks 8 through 12. And I mean, if you're drafting a portfolio of rosters, it evens out, right? But I think your point is interesting of figuring out, I don't just want to say, oh, this was a 9th pick, I guess this one's dead. Like, so what do you do with it to make it different and live, right?
And there's an aspect of like descriptive versus predictive. So like there was someone early on in our in the off season here, there was one of our subscribers who was like, man, I keep, my last 20 drafts, like I don't have any picks in the top like 3 or 4. Like this is, I'm getting screwed. And I was like, well, actually, drafters' top 10 teams last year were 9 of the top 10 teams had a 10th, 11th, or 12th pick.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, okay. And then they messaged like 3 days later and they were like, well, no, all my picks, I haven't gotten any in the 10 through 12 range. I was like, well, and then somebody else, when I first mentioned the thing, they're like, oh, well, I've actually got a bunch of 10 through 12. I'm sitting good. And I was like, well, that's not necessarily what that means. That just means that last year, like CeeDee Lamb was an end of the first round pick and was the wide receiver 1. And then he was paired with the wide receiver 3, especially in like the playoff formats.
It would have been very different if it wasn't Amon-Ra, and if say like a pick that you would have had a harder time pairing with CeeDee Lamb, like Jamar Chase was the wide receiver 2, right?
Yeah,
or if Amon-Ra, it wasn't just Lamb. It was the fact that those 2 players were paired so frequently just because of where the ADP had them,
right?
That it became like a must-have start to win, right? Essentially,
each year, each year, how some of those things play out is going to kind of drive where that, like, there isn't like this pick is the best pick to have. It's going to depend on a variety of factors, and
we have so few years worth of data too, right?
Yeah.
All right, I want to let you guys get to it. I'm over my time a bit, so.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for letting me hang out. Back some props. Get back to some preparing for Showdown. Get an ownership projection.
Yeah, don't you have work to do? Like real work? Go do real work.
No.
Aaron's X, get to work.
Yeah,
ready for the show with Hilow. See, by the way, you can tell from me and Hilow chatting about. You can tell why our show always goes really long.
Yeah. Everyone tries to make it an hour, and it's like unable. Yeah, like 2 hours is the lowest.
Just not happening. Anyway, have a good show. I will see you guys later.
All right, see ya.
See you, dude.
Bye.
Yeah, Hilow. Good to have you on. Good to jam out with you. Like we're always dude. I feel like my busy time of the week and your busy time of the week are like different, and then like understandably so, then you try to take a little like mental break when you can. So like we don't actually like, other than like the group chat, we don't bounce like too much off each other, or like I try to kind of respect your like not letting it totally consume you. But how are things going? How's your drafting going? Where are we at here? I know it's the end of like segment 2 of your draft time.
Yeah, dude, I went really hard, like in my draft window 1, which is like up until the start of training camp. And I guess even like the last 3 weeks leading up to training camp, I just wasn't drafting a lot. Like it was very static window. There wasn't a lot of news. The ADP was very static. So I kind of just like took, and I knew like the big content window was coming up. So I kind of just took a little break. So I went through like a 400 drafts in the first like 6-7 weeks. And then really I just started drafting a ton again. And what really got me like drawn back in is the eliminator on Underdog. I know we're talking drafters here, because we'll talk about that here shortly, but the eliminator was like 92% full. So I wanted to get that maxed out. And I had like, I think it was like 79. I was almost halfway done. So I just like max slowed that because I knew they would probably turn off slows here in a little bit. So I just did that. Like I have like 100 whatever slow drafts going on Underdog. I had been up to I guess up until August when drafters launched the fast draft thing. I had been doing like groups of 20 slow drafts on drafters and just doing that like every 3 or so weeks. So I think now I'm at like, I think somewhere around like 85, 90, something like that on drafters. So now from here on out, it'll probably be all fast drafts. I didn't get to like last year, I was attacking like the onesie twosie contests really, really heavily. And I haven't been as much this season. And I think it's just time. Like there's a lot going on in my personal life right now with the Navy. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. And then with, I'm working at a couple different spots as well. So the off season has not been really this like nice, comfy thing. We're getting our house ready to sell. So I do all the work on it myself. So I got through 2 out of 3 bathrooms are fully renovated now, the laundry room. And then like I put in all of the baseboards when we moved in, which was like 3 years ago now. But I have like they're not caulked and painted yet, so I got to do all that.
Like they're livable but not sellable.
Yeah, exactly. So I got some work to do. So I've been working on the house, doing a lot of content, and just hasn't left as much room for drafting. But I'm like I'm getting really, really hitting it hard again.
Nice. Yeah. So you said, did you do just the $15 or did you do the $2 on drafters?
I did like 3 or 4 $2. Okay. That was the first thing that kind of fell out when I was like, okay, shit, I have not a lot of time right now. And if I had to go back, I might have just max slowed it. But it was just a point where I was just like, well, I know I need to max this $15. And I was just entering like bunches of 20 slow drafts on that bad boy.
Yeah, so I got it up on the screen now. The drafters has a $2. Anyone that's new to best ball in general, or maybe you play on Underdog and DraftKings, you are interested by the drafters format, or we've piqued your interest a little bit today here. You can check drafters out. If you sign up at drafters, create a username. Your first deposit, use code OWS. They'll match your deposit up to $100, 100% match. So you put $100 on, you get $200. So free $100 there. And then they have a $2 contest that you can see here. It is $25,000 to first place. It pays out 16.7% of the field. So same as like a playoff style format where 2 out of 12 teams advance. So like it's got high upside. And with the cumulative format, you remove some variance, so you can feel a little bit better in terms of like your ROI, how much of your money you are likely going to see back. Just from a structural standpoint, it's not quite as like top weighted like to the teams that advance to the final round as the playoff style contest. So you can check that out. Again, $2. If you're new to best ball, it's the lowest price point in the industry. So you can kind of get your feet wet just to best ball in general. And if you're new to drafters and want to try some of them and get your feel for the lay of the land before you do their Drafters Million contest, that is an option as well. So with that said, I am where is it? I fired up a draft, a live draft in the $15. Looks like I drew the 10 slot, and it's draft number 88 for me. So
Okay. Yeah, I'm right around there.
we can kind of go through that. Looks like, oh, we got Eagles in here.
Yeah, well, James.
Yeah, James. And then, so again, I've talked about it. I've been on here for like 14 hours, it feels like.
Yeah.
But so I don't know how many times I'm repeating myself with some of this stuff, or how recently I am repeating it from. Like, did I say it 4 hours ago or 20 minutes ago? But the drafters, one of the cool things about their interface is when you're drafting on the draft board, you can see all the names at the top here. And next to them, like you can see, this is my 88th draft by the 88 next to me. The two people picking in the 8 and 9 spot, this is their first draft in the $15 contest. So seeing a lot more of those like first time drafters, which is good. You know, we want like everyone loves like overlay for the short term, but like, you know, we want drafters to succeed and to thrive. Just it's good for the ecosystem. It's good for players to have more competition among the providers, so they're fighting for us a little bit. So we don't want like, you know, we don't want 40% overlay on this drafters contest, because then we might not have as awesome of a drafters contest next year. So and they're good dudes over there. So with that said, you know, that's one of the cool interface things. Like I know, you know, these guys, I might, as the draft goes on, it might be a little bit less predictable in terms of how they structure some picks that they make before me. So just something I kind of am trying to be aware of.
That's the worst, man, when you're the 10 and the 8 tier 1 guys go.
Yeah. And I was hoping AJ would fall to me. And then like even Amon falling to 8 is
yeah,
enjoyed that here.
AJ's the end of tier 1 for me.
Yeah. I'll just take Wilson. I'll just be boring.
That was a test, dude. I wasn't gonna speak up and see if you did something crazy.
No, I took Wilson. I have Harrison ranked higher, but at the same time, this is like a weird spot here. So like I don't think Harrison falls to me at the next pick, but if he did and I could get him and Wilson, that would be cool. But otherwise, I know who I want to take with this other pick. I'm not going to jinx it though.
I have, so like theoretically speaking, we just talked about the fact that like there are 8 or 9 tier 1 players. So it's probably 9, right? It's all the way through AJ Brown. And then those 3 running backs are included as well. Beyond that, so it's like the 10, 11, and 12 pick, you're like, if any of those guys fall, they're an auto pick. Because the gap from tier 1 to tier 2 is about a weekly range of outcomes thing. And that's important in best ball. Beyond that, like from pick 10, if those tier 1 guys all go up until like the middle to the late 3rd round is all just one massive tier of like similar weekly range of outcomes players that like I'll get really weird. I'll get really weird in this range. I want to see what you do here.
In that mindset, I'm going to take Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, so that's a guy that I have been mixing a lot at the 1-2 turn because most of the time he's going to be paired with your CeeDee Lambs, Tyreek Hills, you know, the guys at the beginning of the first round. Another guy that I've mixed there is not Brandon Ayuk, but Deebo Samuel, because I have been operating.
I was initially gonna.
Yeah, and so like
news.
Yeah, and so I'll have rosters that are like Deebo Samuel, Malik Neighbors at the end of the first round. I don't do Cooper Kupp. He's in that same like discussion. I don't do Cooper Kupp in that discussion because he has been a guy where he has been fairly easy to pair with guys like Malik Neighbors or Deebo Samuel even at the end of the second round. So like the 2-3 turn. So like now you're like fighting against teams that have those two guys and CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill or Christian McCaffrey. Yeah. It's like that doesn't make any sense, right? But guys like Malik Neighbors, we talked about. Deebo Samuel, I've been doing that a lot with. Devonta Smith, I've been doing that a lot with. Jalen Waddle. guys that are typically like not paired together on the same roster, and two, like because their ADPs have not aligned, because we've seen like a little bit of movement in the top 3 rounds, but like the first round has been very clear cut this entire draft cycle. And then like guys that are moving in the second and third round, nobody has really jumped enough to where like you're worried about the combinations of players in that range. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like I've been getting super weird back there. Just trying to seek those like player combinations early that the field really doesn't have a lot of.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So like with me, it was like with Wilson there. For me, with Puka's situation being a little uncertain, I think he'll be okay. But like, I wasn't going to take Puka there with the uncertainty and pair him with Wilson, who he's already paired with on a ton of rosters, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's not really a ton of value there. Now, where he did go at 8, paired with Amon-Ra St. Brown, like I would have snatched him up there. I probably would have taken him at the 9 spot with AJ Brown too, just because, you know, AJ Brown usually goes in the 7 to 9 range, and Puka usually goes in the 10 to 13 or 14 range. Like, it's really rare that those two would have been paired together. So like for that, there's like the uniqueness aspect of getting Puka on those rosters is worth the risk of like, what is this knee injury like? Whereas that risk of I don't know what's going on with his knee. I don't know how long term is this going to be. Is it something that's going to keep flaring up? It's not worth that risk to just pair him with some guy that already is, you know, on 10,000 rosters together. So, you know, that's kind of how my thought process went there. And then, like I said, I considered Debo, you know, just because of the Ayuk news. But I think Neighbors is a guy that, like, Wilson's not going to, unless he gets hurt, of course, but he's not going to fall past like the 15th pick in any drafts.
Yeah.
Neighbors isn't going to fall to the late 3rd round, and he's not going to move up in ADP to like the upper 2nd round, I don't think. So like, that's one that I feel confident will stay as a pretty unique pairing.
Also, the reason I said that like Cooper Kupp I do not include in that discussion is because when this draft or when this contest opened, he was a late 3rd pick. Now you see where he's going. He's going in the early 3rd. So he has moved up every ADP spot. So he has basically been like, you have been able to pair him with all of the combinations because of he has seen his ADP go the entirety of the 3rd round. So like, he doesn't make sense to throw into that discussion of like, let's mix him in now. The only time we're all now, and this is me personally, because like I said, I had like 70% Cooper Kupp through 400 drafts. So like I had all that in the 3rd round, every single Cooper Kupp. So like, I'm not going to start taking him in the 2nd. The only time where I'll take him past 80 or ahead of ADP now is if I see somebody in a draft room behaving sporadically, and I can like see if I can get still a unique combo, and it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. And now, speaking of spread, we got the double tight end move here by one of our first timers.
Talk to me about taking ETN over Laporta there.
I don't want to dig it because
all right. Don't talk to me about
it. I'm like, shoot, because it's what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow on the Tuesday training session. So I might talk a little bit about it as we go on. And I think our Best Ball Plus subscribers, this will be a draft that they can reference back and look at like the draft board for when they're listening, so that they'll have kind of an idea.
Sweet.
One of the strategies around this, I think like all of the drafts we've done today have been from like the 8 to 12 range.
Classic.
Yeah, which is fine. So what you said you're like in the 80s on drafters. It's your first, like, you hadn't played on drafters prior to this year, right?
Correct. So I took advantage of the free $100 using OWS.
Yeah. So
and there you
go. How is how has your experience been? Obviously, you've done a ton on Underdog. You got a huge wealth of knowledge and background with that. How has, like, I guess from like a user interface, that sort of thing, like, how have you found it? And, what are things you like so far about the site?
I think it's great. It's different. That took a little bit of time for me to just get used to the differences. I draft a lot on my phone. Definitely a cell phone shitter, bro. And it's just some intricacies that you got to get used to, like, that just are different than Underdog. And like DraftKings is terrible on the phone, so like I won't even bring. I guess I just brought them up, but I was going to say I'm not even going to talk about them. But no, I mean, the overall interface is really clean. There are some things that I do like better about the Underdog. You mentioned the being able to see how many drafts people are through. That is very nice. Like, you see that one guy is already at 140, and then we have two brand new dudes who this is their first shot in this contest. So that is nice. And like I'm at a very weird, I don't know, like I have a little bit of insight into the behind the scenes of what these providers, like the laws and stuff that they have to abide by, because I tried to launch one of these sites and so I've done all that and like seen all that. So like on Underdog, they do the badges. On Drafters, they do like they actual show you a number of how many times they've drafted. You have to have some level of experience, like per national law, that shows like the experience level of a player. So that's like actually a law. That's why you see Underdog and Drafters have those. But I don't know. I just thought it's interesting the different ways that those two platforms like choose to show like quote unquote experience.
Oh, so that's why they have the badges. Is it's like a legal thing? Okay.
Yeah. They have to have that in order to get licensed.
They kind of frame it as like it's like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
But it's required. Interesting.
Yep.
Nice. So yeah, I would agree. The other thing I've talked about is like the ability to like to look up, like I can look up any of my teams. I can see the whole draft board, which you can do on other sites until it goes live too.
Yeah.
But like here, I can look up my whole draft from my 7th place team last year.
Oh, that's cool.
I can go through it, and that's where I get a lot of my information for it from. Is I can dive into like this whole draft and what I did when I selected players. But like, that's cool. But what's even cooler is I can look up, if I go to the same contest, I can look up the 1st place team. So I can click on them. I can see their roster, and I can go, if I clicked view draft, it would pull up their whole draft board, and I could evaluate that. So I can see where they got guys, not just like I can see how it all played out. I'm not just like hoping, like, I know like Underdog and like they tweeted out like the draft board for the 1st place team and stuff, but like, I can find it all. Well, and from that standpoint, like, like here's my last place team from last year, or my worst team.
Nice, dude.
The last contest. But but the other thing is, and I talked about this earlier, is the thing you see across all sites, right? Anytime there's money to be made, is people are going to try stuff, right? And so like the collusion, or people like tanking drafts and stuff. So like Underdog's really good at like, or all the sites really are pretty good at like canceling drafts when there's those like clear ones, but you have like a backstop too, in that like at any point in the season, week 14, the 1st place team has 100-point lead. Like I can look at their draft and be like,
that accountability is really nice.
Like there's total transparency, and like you can see all of it. So like even if they don't catch it on the front end, it's a little more comforting knowing that there aren't like all these drafts going on, and you're never going to know what happened in like, almost all of them.
Yeah, that transparency is really, really nice. I also I think my favorite thing about drafters is the active drafts ticker, like that you have at the top. That it like highlights and it flashes a big green bubble over it, like when it's your pick, which is really, really good. Like especially when you're like
here. This one I'm 4 away, but it'll turn green when it's my pick.
Yeah. So if you're like even on the phone on the iOS, like it'll like if I'm sitting on the shitter and drafting on my phone, like it'll show me like, okay, I have 7 drafts that I'm on the clock for slows, all flashing. And if I'm doing any fast drafts, they'll move to the top of the queue. And it's really nice to be able to manage all that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like just there it is, flashing at me right now.
Yeah. Boop.
All right. So I've got come on. Got my 4 receivers, 2 running backs. I'm gonna take Jaylen Warren. And I'm basically that is a pick based on the Ayuk news. Probably would have taken Jameson Williams, maybe Hopkins, but probably Jameson Williams there. Were it not for that Ayuk news, just if that ends up being true, I think the Pittsburgh backfield could score. The offense could score more points, which makes the backfield more valuable.
And something I've been doing through that uncertainty is like we knew that Brandon Ayuk was not happy in San Francisco. So like there have been drafts where, especially like if you roll the 101 or 102, where like all of Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle have lined up in ADP. And you could I've been trying to do that if I roll and I have to be very careful because like I have been drafting CeeDee Lamb on this platform as the 101. But if I take CMC, I had been looking like over the last 3 weeks at like seeking out a CMC Deebo George Kittle roster. So I have like 4 or 5 of those in the portfolio, which now Deebo's probably going to move up to a place where, I mean, if Ayuk does get traded, Deebo's going to move up to a place where you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, and it's not official at the moment or anything. Yeah. So not speaking on it, but figured I'd give it a shot here. Again, drafting a lot of teams, so yeah, I like that how you kind of pair them together, and it worked out there. Where was I before? Oh, we were talking about the interface and the things that you can do with it. So there's where am I? I'm checking out here. I'm hitting a wall. Let's talk about some players or teams. You go ahead. Who do you
players and teams?
Yeah, I mean, so I just took Jameson Williams, steady drumbeat around him. Greg from Coach Speak was talking about him a little bit. Are you in on him? What do you think about him? Because like it makes sense to me, but then at the same time, like I go back and forth because I keep coming back to like, yeah, but he's gonna be like the deep guy, and it's Jared Goff.
Yeah. So I'm looking up his. I have 4% of JMO. Let me double check. Yeah, I'm about 4% on both major sites. Yeah, for me, like he's so pros. He's on an offense expected to be top 3 in scoring. He has had a solid ADOT, so like he can have that big play potential. Like, but that's kind of it. Like, and he's entering his 3rd season. Like a typical, if a wide receiver has not broken out in their first 3 seasons, it's very unlikely to happen, right? Like cons, the list kind of outweighs the pros list for me. Like cons, like he's the 4th option maybe on his offense. He has not proven to be a reliable week-to-week guy. His upside games are nothing really to write home about. He missed the first, like we can't even like talk about his rookie season because he was coming off of the latest ACL tear that like you can have coming into the league. He tore his ACL in the national championship game. But then like he comes right back and he gets the 4-game suspension, 8 games reduced to 4 games, entering his second year. And it's like, okay, I kind of get this sense that you're a little bit non-serious, right? And like Brandon Ayuk kind of not necessarily had a similar trajectory because of off the field stuff, but he had a similar trajectory because like he was not doing the little things right. And Kyle Shanahan was like, you need to block, dude. Cause that's what our offense needs. So it took him like 3 years before he really broke out too. So like that is within JMo's range of outcomes. But at the same time, like I didn't want to have 0 of a guy like JMo. Like what would have happened to JMo's ADP if Amon-Ra or Sam Laporta got hurt? Probably would have jumped multiple rounds. So I didn't want to have a 0. He wasn't like a true fade, but I was definitely, I think, below consensus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's pretty, I think that's a pretty solid take. And like, I like taking him on like, so this roster, he ends up as my 5th receiver and as a solid 6th one as well. So like, I'll take that where I'm not like relying on him to give me usable weeks, like consistently week in, week out, etc.
Yeah.
I'll take Cooks there, load up on that wide receiver room. Some more. That Dallas situation is one that I haven't really talked about at all today, but like, with Dak and Lamb both like kind of, I think they're both practicing, right? Are they?
CD is not.
Okay. And then
he's doing like a hold in thing. He's like, I think he's at camp, but he's not practicing.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause they get huge fines if they actually hold out now.
Mm-hmm.
They just show up and stand on the side.
Yeah.
So after Lamb, Cooks and Ferguson are like the only like legit proven NFL pass catchers. And it's not like their backfield is anything like excessive to write home about. I find myself, I have a lot of Cooks that I take in this like 9th, 10th round range. I find it really hard if receiver is on my radar at all to not take him there.
So I started this off season like heavy Cooks because I like noticed that it was one of those like lopsided upside weekly range of outcomes versus ADP situations. And then I kind of like started thinking like, I think Jake Ferguson is probably more undervalued than Brandon Cooks. And the reason being like Brandon Cooks' role in this offense and his like weekly range of outcomes picture probably remains fairly static regardless of what happens behind him, like, or in front of him. Like if CeeDee Lamb gets injured in week 2 and is out the rest of the season, Brandon Cooks probably isn't going to be like the main cog in the offense through the air. At this point in his career, like he's a soon to be 32-year-old wide receiver. His efficiency metrics have been in decline for the past 3 seasons. So he's probably not just going to immediately like just be this guy. And he doesn't have the frame to kind of be like run a similar route tree to like CeeDee Lamb. Well, Jake Ferguson like kind of does. He's young. He has the athleticism. He has the ability to generate those mismatches over the middle of the field. And like, not like he would be just this like world beater, but like something along the lines of what we saw with Trey McBride over the second half of last season, where it's like, he is the best, most athletic and best like pass catcher that they have at that point. So it could be something like that. So I kind of started like coming on to Jake Ferguson a little bit heavier than I was Brandon Cooks. And this is, again, might be different for other people because at the time that I kind of got to that point, I already had a ton of Brandon Cooks because he was going in like the 10th, 11th round and he was undervalued. And I expect that Dallas could lead the league in pass attempts this season. There was just a lot going for Brandon Cooks. But then I was like, okay, I know if I stop drafting Brandon Cooks right now, I'll still be overweight. And I didn't have a lot of Jake Ferguson at the time. So that like equation is going to be different for everybody. But that was kind of like where I was at. Now, like over the last month or so, I've been really like kind of prioritizing Jake Ferguson. And I've been prioritizing Jake Ferguson on non-CeeDee Lamb builds, I think, more than like trying to pair Jake Ferguson with CeeDee and Dak.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And honestly, even when you put it that way, it almost makes sense to it almost makes sense in my mind to just say, hey, you know what? If I take Ferguson, I'm not gonna take Dak either. Just from like if Ferguson hits his ceiling, especially
100%.
this cumulative format, if he hits his ceiling or becomes that like the guy for the offense, it might mean Lamb's not playing. And if Lamb's not playing, well, then Dak's probably he's not, Ferguson could go up with Dak
100%.
having a worse season.
Yeah. So like if everything works out for the Cowboys, everybody stays healthy and the offense finishes top 5 in scoring. And then maybe top 1 in pass attempts. In that case, like there's room for CeeDee Lamb plus Brandon Cooks plus Dak. But I am not drafting Dak if I do not have CeeDee Lamb. Because his path to a ceiling runs directly through CeeDee.
Yeah, that's interesting. I will say on drafters specifically, I would just from the standpoint of like if Dak falls in ADP, because like if you have like a late pick here and Dak were to fall to like 106, 107, obviously you're not going to have Lamb there, but like nobody who picks at that range is going to have Lamb. Whereas you just get the ADP value. But yeah, I think like with the playoff formats, that's like unviable altogether almost because if Dak hits in that last week, it's going to be really hard to beat the CeeDee Lamb plus Dak rosters.
Yeah.
So I just took Taysom Hill. I reached on him because
it's my dude.
Mainly wanted to talk about him.
Yes.
And it's just such a weird, like when Sean Payton left the Saints, I thought by now we'd be done with Taysom Hill. But it seems like it's almost like going the other way. And
Allen likes him more, dude.
Yeah, like now he's like, yeah, we're gonna use him as a pass catcher too. And Juwan Johnson's hurt. Kendre Miller, Dennis Allen is wishing death upon his family. Just kidding. He's not doing that. But like, he's very harsh on Miller. Jamal Williams runs in quicksand. Kamara's 29. Like, yeah, there's just, Derek Carr, they're like stuck with because they're in cap hell. Taysom is a guy who, like, especially on this type of build, is really interesting to me. I guess, do you have any thoughts on the Saints offense in general?
Yes. I am below consensus on the Saints offense as a whole. And there are 2 players that I have been taking at an above average rate, and that's Taysom Hill and Rashid Shaheed. Shaheed, because of the spike week potential, his downfield kind of in this offense, like where he's being drafted. He started in like the 13th round. Now he's in like the 10th round, something like that, or 11th round. So that, like, for a weekly range of outcomes perspective in these contests, and I've been prioritizing him more on a half point PPR site like Underdog, because he's not like a PPR mega man. But like his weekly range of outcomes for me did not match his ADP at all yet this offseason, because like he was a just under 60% snap rate player last season, and he still had like 5-6 usable weeks. We expect that to go up now. Michael Thomas is no longer in town. They have no really secondary pass catcher weapon in that offense. I mean, Kamara is probably the secondary pass catcher. But yeah, and then Taysom Hill is very, very interesting on drafters because they have him at tight end. And I mean, go back to like 2 years ago where he had like 2 games of 25 plus fantasy points. And I think it was one game where he scored 3 touchdowns and had like 32. So this is a guy that has an extremely wide range of outcomes. I mean, he's probably going to see like 4 to 8 touches a week. He's not going to see he's not going to see a 10 target game, right? Like we don't expect that. But we do expect him to be highly or heavily involved in the red zone, which is important. And we do expect him to catch passes in full PPR is important and see carries. So, and throw passes. Like he's going to do it all, I think, for this offense. So he is a guy that I liken to George Kittle as far as weekly range of outcomes goes, because he's going to have a lot of games where he scores 4 to 6 points. Like he's not doing anything for you. But he's also going to have like potentially a game or two where he scores 25 plus. And I'm of the, I don't want to get too much into it, like behind the paywall stuff, but I'm of the mindset that the field is not paying enough attention to the tight end position because it is flatter this year than it has ever been. We don't have prime Travis Kelce. We don't have like even before Travis Kelce, like it was like the oh my God, now I'm drawing a blank on their names, but the Antonio Gates and
Jimmy Graham.
Yeah. The guys that like deserved to kind of be above the rest of the field as like the unquestioned tight end one. Like we're kind of past that. Like we have an up and coming Sam Laporta, we have an up and coming Trey McBride, we have an up and coming Dalton Kincaid, but it's like, and then we have like Travis Kelce, who has caught 92 or more passes in like 6 straight years, like, but he's 33, 34, right? So that combined with like where the tight end position is going in the NFL, I think is leading to drafters kind of just like, this is an afterthought position. So in like thinking that, like I'm targeting George Kittle a ton. I'm targeting Taysom Hill in this format a ton because those guys can put up the 25 plus, 30 plus fantasy point weeks. And at tight end, like there aren't going to be many of those scores this year. There's probably not going to be a many 30 plus fantasy point scores at tight end. So particularly in cumulative scoring, I'm accepting those wide ranges of outcomes and like seeking them out. And like, I made a rule, like, well, okay. I made a rule, like if I'm drafting Taysom or if I'm drafting George Kittle or any of these other like wide range of outcomes guys, TJ Hawkinson, that you just took, they have to be on 3+ tight end builds. It's like if like,
which is a big decision point on Underdog. For me on drafters, it's not as much of a decision point, but on Underdog,
up to 4 on drafters
spots, like with 18, it's like that's a tough trigger to pull, is that third tight end. So like that's an important distinction that you're making there, where it's like I'm going to do this. So yeah.
And in order to make that happen, like without getting into the behind the paywall nuances, like you have to make a decision at quarterback in conjunction with that, because we don't want to be over investing in both of those positions. But like on drafters, like I'm okay. Like my dream tight end room is probably 4 tight ends, and it's like George Kittle, Taysom Hill, and then like some late round guys. Like Jonnu Smith is probably in that same discussion of like really, really wide weekly range of outcomes. So like I'm okay like hunting for that upside. Like if you get 4 20+ point games or weeks from George Kittle, if you get 2 20+ weeks from Taysom Hill, if you get like fill in the gaps with 10+ or 10 to 15 point weeks from Jonnu Smith or Colby Parkinson or some of these like late guys, like that can be the same as like drafting both of Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta, just from like a weekly range of outcomes talking point. So like, I'm okay going up to 4 tight ends and accepting the weekly wide range of outcomes. I'm not saying that like is the way this season, but it's potential for those like spike weeks to line up in a way that you're piecing together the tight end one through these weekly wide range of outcomes, guys.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And like the tight end position in general is one that like it's weird. I don't remember a time where like there's no tight ends in like the top 30 picks basically. Across all formats. Like
I don't think it's happened in best ball because we've always had a Gronk. We've always had like prime Kelsey, prime Gronk. I don't think in best ball, like even if we go back to the hell was it? The company that got bought by FanDuel. Draft. Yeah. If you go back to draft, like we have 7 data points. Like that was 2 or 3 years prior to Underdog and Drafters. Like we haven't seen where we haven't had a tight end in the top like 3 rounds at all in that point. And that's why I say like it's kind of this just like afterthought position this year where it's like, okay, like the top 12 tight ends all have weekly range of outcomes that are very similar, but they don't have necessarily like a strong weekly floor. Like Sam Laporta got there on touchdowns last season. It's this very weird position where I think like if the field's not paying attention to that, like I kind of want to be thinking about how I can exploit that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'm going to see if I can get like in for that position. I passed on one here, but I'm going to see so the guys at the 11 and 12 slot both already have 2 tight ends and took one in the first 5 rounds.
So on this roster, you have Taysom Hill, who has an extremely wide weekly range of outcomes. You have TJ Hawkinson, who has an extremely wide weekly range of outcomes, likely to start the season on PUP. You're not going to have him for at least the first 4 weeks. Are you thinking that you're done at 3, or are you considering like 4 as well?
It'll depend on where some other guys fall at some other positions. Because I'm trying to like based on what I did here at the 3-4 turn.
You got some work somewhere else.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm checking it out. I'm kind of torn to your point. Like I have Taysom and Hawkinson as my first 2 tight ends. Wide range of outcomes, but then Hawkinson, the questions around him like early in the season. So like the 2 guys that I've got like queued up here that I'm kind of between are Isaiah Likely and Likely went off the board, so that makes it easier. But so I'm taking Jonnu as my 3rd tight end. But if they were both there, I probably would have leaned Jonnu anyways, just because Likely, like I love Isaiah Likely as a player. But like his upside and where he like really pays off being drafted in the 16th round is if Andrews misses significant time and he's playing 90% of snaps. With Hawkinson likely to miss, or a good chance that he misses early in the season, it just makes it would make it tough where like Taysom's such a high variance player, and then I possibly have Hawkinson on the bench, like not playing at all and likely playing 30% of snaps for the first 6 or 7 weeks. Like that could kind of tank the roster in terms of what the tight end position has output wise. But like otherwise, I love how this how it kind of stacks up. I might take a 4th tight end here with with the bye weeks stacking up with Jonnu and Hawkinson. But again, Hawkinson, I already know he might miss some time. I'm just banking on like he could be, I don't think he'll be what he was with Cousins, but like he could be a top 5-ish point per game tight end in the weeks he's healthy. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think for me, TJ Hawkinson makes a lot more sense on a playoff style contest format, like Underdog or DraftKings, because the payouts are so heavily weighted towards those playoff rounds.
Oh yeah.
So he's not a guy that I've really been clicking on drafters. So that's why I asked the question, like, kind of what's your plan? What's your take here?
Yeah, I see kind of where it falls. It kind of gives me some flexibility where like if there's other positions that I see value in or that obviously I need quarterback at some point, I have 3 now and I can just be like, yep, I'm kind of betting on like Hawkinson's going to be back earlier and things will line up. And if some of the guys I'm targeting, like I can get uncomfortable, like, and maybe just have Rodgers and whatever I get as my QB2 and just like be like, well, I'm betting on Rodgers, returning to form. So, I'll kind of see where the board falls here and what kind of falls in my lap. I've got to do some quick math here. So I got 4 rounds left.
That's another thing I like, going back to like what we like about drafters. If you scroll down to where you have the positional breakdown of like where you have, I had not been using this for the longest time, but like where it says all shows you 16 of 20. So like, oh, okay, I have 4 rounds left.
Yeah. So yes, from like a user standpoint, like the interface allows you
the UI is nice.
You don't have to like count your roster or like click back and forth. Like I have this up, I have the board up with the queue and with like it's got access to like everything kind of all at once.
Yeah,
which works out well. All right, what are we gonna do here? QB room is real dicey. All right, I'm gonna add Tyler Boyd here as my 9th receiver from the Titans. Again, probably it's a little uncomfortable, but I've got an idea kind of what I want to do later. Drake May is like he's been like super tough for me because like I don't know what's gonna happen. Like the Patriots are such like an uncertain situation.
Yeah. Not only that, I got a lot to say about Drake May actually. I'll let you pick though.
Let her rip. I'll take Bo Nix, and I don't like doing it, but just because on this roster, cumulative scoring, getting him is like I feel pretty certain he's going to be a starting quarterback for most of the year.
Yeah, he's a betting favorite to start the year.
Yeah, so I'll do that here and be a little uncomfortable, and then we'll see what these last 2 rounds bring us.
Drake May is very interesting from a weekly range of outcomes discussion because through the work that I've done, I found that total touchdowns is the most correlative piece or predictive metric that we can have towards quarterback scoring. And then on the other hand, it's like, okay, the Patriots are expected to be dead last in scoring this season. The other side of that coin is like he brings a somewhat of a rushing expectation to the table. So like how important in this format are like the bankable 4 to 6 weekly points that we expect from him on the ground? Like from a ceiling perspective, probably not a ton. So he's a guy that I have been mixing in a way that I'm saying like the Patriots as a team like outperform their expectations like significantly. Like they end the season like in the middle of the pack in scoring instead of in the bottom 5. The Titans are another team that I've been doing that with, and those are some good examples. I guess the Broncos are also a team that I'm doing that with, like because their pieces are all cheap, their primary pass catchers are cheap. The Titans less so, but like their quarterback is, and I think you can get those guys late. And you're not saying that I like this quarterback. You're saying that I expect this offense to like vastly outperform their projection. And if you do that, you're not taking a guy like Bo Nix, or you're not taking a guy like any of those other 3 teams. I mean, we're talking about like the Patriots, the Titans, and the Broncos. You're not taking their quarterback unstacked if you can help it. Like if you're saying this team vastly outperforms their expectation, you want that to be stacked. So Jalen Polk in New England, Cortland Sutton in Denver. What I like about Bo Nix is like there's actually starters that are going behind him still from a pass catching sense. So like, yeah, you have, I'm not going to name them because we'll jinx him here, but like you have options still. The Patriots, it's like, yeah, there's not really some pass catching options going behind the quarterback. The Titans, it's like, yeah, not really. It's only Treylon Burks, depending on how you see that slot position playing out in Tennessee. So, yeah, Bo Nix is probably my favorite of those three from a weekly range of outcomes perspective. It's like, okay, at least in Denver, we know we have the combination of Sean Payton and Lombardi, that we know like they have a history of scoring points. Like New England, they have an entirely new staff. Tennessee, at least we have the warm and fuzzy that it's like a Kyle Shanahan / Gary Kubiak coaching tree coach and Zach Taylor. Wait, did I get that wrong? Whatever.
Who's that?
The head coach in the Titans. It's been a long day for me as well. Brian Callahan, not Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor is somewhere else. But yeah, like
Dulcich, if that's who you're talking about.
What's that?
Were you talking about Dulcich for before the Denver?
Yeah, there's three really that we can. There's three really that are going behind Bo Nix. I mean, we have like there's Greg Dulcich, there's
Reynolds,
Josh Reynolds, and then potentially there's some interesting things that can happen with the third wide receiver position. We think it's going to be like Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin competing for like a downfield type Z type role. But there's like Tim Patrick, who has like been proven, and like Sean Payton and Lombardi like have this like soft spot for veteran tall wide receivers. I don't know what it is, but like, I mean, last season it was like Lil Jordan Humphreys. We were like, why is this dude playing? It was like a veteran tall wide receiver. Tim Patrick's got that going for him. So it's like you can get a little bit interesting with that kind of like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 discussion for the Broncos. I've been drafting Josh Reynolds. I've been drafting a little bit of Tim Patrick even. And then that discussion of like, is it going to be Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin? We don't really know yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how this played out where I was able, with my 18th and 20th round picks, right? I got Nix and Dulcich. So like stacking isn't as like necessary or whatever as like it is on the playoff formats. But here on this roster where like I built like pretty fragile quarterback room, pretty fragile tight end room. So putting those two together where it's like, I don't know how great I feel about what those rooms are going to put together. Like having that possible correlation where like tight ends and quarterbacks tend to correlate their scoring well. That could come in handy on a roster like this. Obviously this roster is going to need, Aaron Rodgers to be, Aaron Rodgers, like the old
37-year-old Aaron Rodgers.
Yes. So it's probably not going to get there. I don't, honestly, not a huge fan of how this one turned out.
Yeah, this was a wonky draft for sure.
Yeah, some weird things happen, but that's like, you see like, I mean, even just where the quarterbacks went with like Lawrence went in the 10th round. And then like this draft looks a lot different if like, so Purdy, Goff, Tua all went right before I picked. If I get one of those guys here, that's different. And then even Cousins, like, that, what are we at there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17 quarterbacks through round 11. So like, and then Herbert was the next one and he's hurt. And Stafford and Watson went before I came. Like it's the casuals coming out again. Quarterbacks. The simple way to think about it: quarterbacks score the most points. I should take more quarterbacks. But as we know, not necessarily the case. Yeah.
Hey,
so-
RE Brandon Ayuk, dude. Nothing happened yet, but we at least have like a substantiated report from Mike Garofalo and Tom Pelissero, NFL Network dudes. That they said Brandon Ayuk is more likely to be traded than sign an extension. So it sounds like he has like generated that leverage. That I was just like this entire season, like he has no leverage. There's no way that he's getting traded. And then like the longer this drug on, I was like, well, let me plan for the case where like maybe he generates it. And it kind of seems like he might have. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it seems legit. Maybe the Pittsburgh thing doesn't end up happening. That could also be a leak where like there's so many levels to this, and like we're just like getting like they're showing us what they want us to hear or see. Like it could be that the Browns or the Patriots I saw were like a few days ago were like supposedly the front runners. Well, like that could have been a report like generated to like apply pressure to the Steelers, who really
it could have come from
Ayuk's
agent.
This could be to prod New England or Cleveland to like up their offer. So we never know what's legit and what's just like using us to make some noise. But I think that's gonna do it for us, unless I think we've talked about every team today, I think.
Nice. Yeah,
but
I gotta pee like a racehorse. So I'm
good.
Good.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Once again, everyone, if you are not already, check us out, oneweekseason.com, our Best Ball Plus 2024 subscription, now down to $129. Use code BB Marathon for an extra $30 off today, and I think it'll be up tomorrow as well. So special promo for this day of drafters, $30 off. Also, make sure you use code OWS. The $100 if you're new to drafters, hard to pass up that money. Use that money to subscribe to Best Ball Plus. You'll be ahead of the game. And again, if you're watching this later, these will stay up on YouTube. If you are new to drafters, drop your username in the comments, and they're going to give me some tickets that we'll be able to add to your accounts. And then this Friday, for every 5 new users to our Best Ball Plus subscription from this week, for every 5 new users until it's been a long day. For every 5 users that use our OWS code on drafters this week, we will give out 1 free Best Ball Plus subscription. So we'll get your information from them. We'll randomly draw and get you guys added, get into our Discord. So with that, I am Mike. He is Hilow. Thank you so much to all you guys for joining with us. It's been a blast. I'm going to go take a walk.
And a nap. Probably not at the same time.
Well, I got a 5-year-old coming in the door hot in like 20 minutes. So,
let's go, dude.
It's go time. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, man. We'll talk soon. And best of luck. We'll see y'all in Discord, on Twitter /X, and at the top of the leaderboards in the draft rooms. Peace.
1 week season.